She was standing at a grease-stained prep counter, chopping onions at 5 in the morning, when the radio crackled with news of soldiers dying 12 miles away. The base had one A-10 on the flight line, no qualified pilots available, except her. Captain Maya Voss set down the knife, wiped her hands on her apron, walked out of the mess hall without a word. Nobody stopped her, because nobody believed the cook was serious. They would spend the rest of their lives remembering the moment they underestimated her. If this story hits you, subscribe, hit like, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. The alarm went off at 4:45, same as always. Maya Voss didn't lie in bed. She never did. She swung her feet onto the cold concrete floor of her assigned quarters, a single-occupancy room in the back end of the support staff barracks, tucked behind the motor pool and directly across from the trash compactor. And she sat there in the dark for exactly 30 seconds. It was a habit she couldn't explain to anyone. 30 seconds. Feet on the floor, hands on her knees, eyes open, not praying, not meditating, just letting the silence of the base settle around her before the world filled up with noise again. Then she stood up, put on her uniform, and went to work. Redstone Valley Air Station woke up in phases. The flight crews stirred first, pulling pre-dawn briefs in the operations building while the coffee was still brewing. Then the maintenance teams came alive, voices carrying across the flight line as engines were inspected and fuel trucks were moved into position. The administrative staff arrived last, unhurried, carrying insulated mugs and complaining about the heat. Maya arrived before all of them. By the time the first airmen pushed through the mess hall door at 05:30, the scrambled eggs were already done, the toast was stacked in warming trays, and the coffee was fresh. The breakfast line moved efficiently because she ran it that way. Tongs laid out at proper intervals, each tray refilled before it hit empty, the whole operation quiet and without friction. She had been doing this for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She kept count because there was nothing else to count. Voss, the voice came from behind the serving line. Airman Decker, 22 years old, corn-fed and loud, wiping down a counter he'd barely touched. You burned the toast again. She looked at the trays. The toast was fine, slightly dark on one corner of one rack, but well within any reasonable standard. Tasted it? She asked. Don't need to. He smirked. I can smell it from here. Then maybe your nose is wrong. He made a face like she'd said something offensive. A few of the kitchen staff laughed. Not at him, she thought. At her. Or maybe at both of them. It was hard to tell anymore, and she'd stopped trying to parse the social geometry of people who thought the mess hall was the most important place on this base. She turned back to the line and kept working. The breakfast rush lasted until 0700. After that came cleanup, inventory, prep for the noon meal. There was always something requiring her attention, always a gap between what the supply list said and what was actually in the refrigeration units, always some argument between the kitchen staff about scheduling or overtime or who left the grill uncleaned. Maya handled it all, quietly, without drama. She didn't have the energy for drama. Or maybe she had too much of it, packed down so tightly inside her chest that she didn't dare let even a thread of it loose. The flight line was visible from the kitchen's east-facing windows if you stood at the right angle. She had stopped standing at that angle a year ago. She'd made herself stop, the same way you make yourself stop touching a burn. Deliberately, with effort, every single time. But she still heard the jets. You couldn't not hear them at Redstone Valley. The A-10s took off at intervals through the morning, heavy and thunderous. The kind of sound that didn't just reach your ears but moved through your sternum, your back teeth, the soles of your feet. Each time she heard that sound, something in her chest went very still. Then she kept chopping. The base was not a large one. Redstone Valley sat at the edge of a plateau in the high desert, surrounded by flat rock and dry brush for 20 miles in every direction. It existed primarily as a forward support station, a logistics hub and staging area for operations in the region, with a secondary mission of A-10 ground attack support. The aircraft were the heartbeat of the place. Everything else, the barracks, the administrative buildings, the motor pool, the mess hall, the medical clinic, existed in service of those jets. And Maya Voss served breakfast to the people who flew them. She had been placed in kitchen duty at the recommendation of her assigned evaluation officer after she was grounded. The official language used words like limited duty reassignment and transitional support role, which was the military's way of saying, We don't know what to do with you, so we're putting you somewhere you can't cause any more problems." She had not protested. There had been no point in protesting. The formal grounding order had come 18 months after the crash. The crash itself had happened on a Tuesday, during a live-fire training exercise over the southern range. Her A-10 had gone into an uncontrolled roll at low altitude, following what the post-incident report described as pilot-induced instability during a recovery maneuver. She had ejected at the last possible second. The aircraft had hit the desert floor and burned. The investigation took 6 weeks. The final report assigned primary responsibility to pilot error. Her record, which had been exceptional, was amended. Her flight status was suspended pending further review. The review board met 3 times over the following year, and each time concluded that insufficient grounds existed to fully reinstate her. Nobody ever said the word "finished" to her face. They didn't need to. She started working the mess hall during the second week of her grounding, when it became clear that standing around in administrative limbo was doing something bad to her that she couldn't name but could feel in her hands. A restless tightness, like her body was waiting for a cue that never came. The kitchen gave her something to do. It gave her a structure, a rhythm. She hated it. She did it anyway. Captain Voss. She was in the back of the supply room at roughly 0900, doing a physical count of protein inventory, because the automated tracking system had been wrong 3 weeks in a row when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished writing the number in her notebook. 83 vacuum-sealed packages of chicken breast, not the 91 the system claimed. And then she turned. Lieutenant Garrick Pell stood in the doorway. He was young, maybe 25, and wore the expression of someone who had been sent to deliver a message he found personally distasteful. "Commander Cross wants to see you," Pell said. "At what time?" "Now, ma'am." She set the notebook on the shelf. "Tell him I'll be there after I finish inventory." He said now. She looked at Pell. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked at the floor. She pulled off her kitchen gloves, tucked the notebook under her arm, and walked out. Commander Ethan Cross occupied a corner office in the operations building with windows on 2 sides, one facing the flight line and one facing the administrative courtyard. He was 51 years old, thick through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had probably never been described as warm. He had been the station commander at Redstone Valley for 3 years. In that time, Maya had spoken to him directly on 4 occasions. This was the 5th. He was standing when she entered, which she noted. He rarely stood for anyone. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit." "I'm fine standing, sir." He studied her for a moment, then decided not to fight it. He moved around to his side of the desk and sat himself, then set down the folder he'd been holding. "There's a situation with the Eastern Convoy route," he said. "Route 7 Bravo. Are you familiar with it?" "Generally, sir. I know the terrain." This morning, at approximately 08:15, a 4-vehicle logistics convoy out of Forward Staging Point Keller came under sustained contact near the Black Ridge Corridor. Small arms fire, RPGs, and what appears to be a vehicle-mounted heavy machine gun. 2 vehicles are disabled. We have 6 personnel confirmed wounded. Communications are degraded. He paused. "We are attempting to coordinate CAS assets. The nearest available aircraft are 40 minutes out from an alternate base. We currently have one A-10 on the flight line here that passed its morning inspection." The room was very quiet. "The qualified pilots assigned to CAS support are both unavailable. Major Hendricks is at a medical facility in Dalton for a procedure he scheduled 3 weeks ago. Captain Rourke is at the forward command post and cannot be recalled in time." Maya said nothing. Cross looked at her. "You are technically the only person on this installation with A-10 qualification hours." "My flight status is suspended," she said. "I'm aware." "Then with respect, sir, why am I in this office?" He leaned back slightly. There was something working behind his eyes. A calculation, or maybe a conflict. "I'm exploring options." "You're not exploring options, Commander. You're considering ordering a grounded pilot into a live combat mission because you don't have anyone else." She kept her voice level. "And you want to see if I'll push back hard enough to make it easy for you to say no." His expression didn't change. "Your hours in type are 1,240. Your live fire performance record before the incident was among the highest in the squadron." Was. "The aircraft's current fuel load is sufficient for the flight profile. We have coordinates on the contact zone. The ground element has a functioning JTAC who can talk you onto target. He paused. I'm not ordering you, Captain. I'm telling you the facts of the situation. You're not ordering me because if I crash again, you want to be able to say it was my decision. The words came out harder than she'd intended. She held his gaze. Cross was quiet for a long moment, then quietly, Are you able to fly that aircraft or not? She looked at him, at the folder on his desk, at the window behind him, where the flight line shimmered in the morning heat, and the shape of an A-10 sat at the far end of the tarmac, like something she'd dreamed too many times to count. I'll need the aircraft codes and the JTAC frequency, she said. Oh, she didn't go straight to the flight line. She went to the women's locker room adjacent to the pilot ready room, a space she hadn't entered in over 2 years, stripped off her kitchen uniform, and pulled on a flight suit that had been sitting in her locker since the day she was grounded. The zipper stuck at first. She worked it free. She sat on the bench for a moment, holding her helmet in both hands. The foam lining had compressed slightly with age. The visor had a hairline scratch across the upper right corner that she remembered getting during her third live fire qualification, when a spent casing had bounced off the canopy rail. She put the helmet on, adjusted the chin strap, breathed. The smell inside the helmet, sweat and rubber and something metallic she'd never been able to identify, was so familiar it made her eyes burn. She stood up and walked to the flight line. Sergeant First Class Rennick was the crew chief assigned to the A-10 sitting on pad 6. He was a compact, weathered man in his early 40s who had been maintaining A-10s for 18 years. He was standing under the port wing doing a final check when he heard footsteps on the tarmac. He looked up. Maya walked toward him with a helmet under her arm and a tablet in her hand showing the aircraft's current maintenance log. Crew chief, she said. He stared at her. Captain Voss. What's the status on this aircraft? Morning inspection complete. Fuel at 83%. Guns hot. Ordnance load is 2 AGM-65s, 30 millimeters at 1,100 rounds. He paused. Ma'am, I haven't seen any flight orders. They're coming. What's the hydraulic status? He hesitated only a moment more, then shifted into professional mode, the way experienced NCOs do when they decide to trust the officer in front of them. Hydraulics nominal. System 2 had a minor pressure variance at OH700, within acceptable range. I've got it documented. Any issues with the avionics suite? HUD's clean, TGP is synced, radio stack is current. He paused again. The gun system's been recalibrated since last week. She's going to shoot a little right at range. How much right? 3 milliradians. I was going to log it for correction, but there hasn't been a tasking. I'll compensate. She walked around the nose of the aircraft, trailing her hand along the fuselage the way she used to, not sentimentally, but checking, reading the surface with her fingertips. Get me the boarding ladder. Rennick watched her for a moment. Then he went and got the ladder. She was in the cockpit running through the startup checklist when the radio crackled. Voss, Cross's voice, ground operations is asking for your authorization code. I gave it to Lieutenant Pell. Your current authorization. You're grounded, Captain. Your code is flagged. Then unflag it. A pause. Cross. She said his name without a title and without softening it. There are soldiers bleeding out in that canyon right now. Whatever paperwork problem you're working on, work faster. Another pause, longer this time. Then, code override is being processed. You have a 12-minute window. I only need 8. She went back to the checklist. Engine start sequence. Left, then right. The turbines wound up slowly, then caught with a sound she felt in her spine, a vibration that climbed up through the seat and into her back and said, unmistakably, "You're back." Warning lights cleared one by one. The HUD blinked on. The targeting pod came up clean. She ran through the weapons checks mechanically, each step precise and unhurried. This wasn't something she needed to think hard about. Her hands knew the sequence. They had always known it. Tower, Warthog 24, requesting clearance for departure. Runway 20, immediate. A brief hesitation from the tower. She could almost hear the controller checking and rechecking his screen. 24 tower. You are cleared for departure. Runway 20. Wind is calm. No traffic. Copy tower. She released the brakes and began to move. The taxiway was a familiar geography. The painted lines, the distance markers, the row of hangar doors on her left. She had rolled down this exact path hundreds of times. But 2 years was long enough for things to feel slightly different. The seat felt different. Her hands on the controls felt different. Not worse. Just different. Like slipping into a piece of clothing you'd worn in a previous life and finding that it still fits, that your body remembers the shape of it. She reached the hold short line and stopped. Looked down the runway. 2,000 meters of flat concrete shimmering slightly with rising heat, ending in a blur of scrub desert and sky. She pushed the throttles forward. The A-10 did not accelerate elegantly. It had never been an elegant aircraft. It was big and blunt and loud, and it gathered speed the way a freight train does, steadily, with enormous mass, until it was moving so fast that arguing with it became pointless. She felt the rumble through the rudder pedals, felt the nose begin to lift, felt the moment when the main gear broke ground and the aircraft committed itself to the air. She pulled back the gear handle, felt the wheels retract and lock. The desert floor dropped away beneath her. For a moment, just a moment, she closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was climbing through 3,000 feet, and the base was already small behind her. Warthog 2-4, this is Ridgeback Actual. I have you on scope. Welcome to the party. Over. The JTAC's voice was steady and controlled, the voice of someone who was managing fear by burying it under procedure. Professional. Maya respected it immediately. Ridgeback Actual 2-4, inbound your position. Send sit TREP. 2-4, we have 4 vehicles at the mouth of Black Ridge Corridor. Grid Kilo Tango 772. 2 vehicles mission killed. 6 wounded, 2 of whom are urgent surgical. We are taking fire from 3 positions. Northeast ridgeline, approximately 300 meters, and 2 positions south of the road, elevated terrain. Enemy has an HMG, likely DSHK, firing from the south position. That gun is the primary threat. Over. She pulled the coordinates into the TGP and brought up the targeting screen. 2-4 copies. HMG is priority. I'm at 12,000. Inbound from the north. Talk me onto the southern position. Over. 2-4, from your current heading, the HMG is at the base of the second ridge line, 12 o'clock, 800 meters from the convoy. There's a dried creek bed running east-west. The gun is sighted just north of that creek bed, behind a rock formation. Over. I see the creek bed. She slewed the TGP south. The targeting pod's image resolved through the morning haze, rock, scrub, the pale line of the creek bed. I'm looking for the gun position. They've got netting over it. They go cold between bursts. She waited. Watched the image. Then she saw it. A brief muzzle signature. A puff of dust rising from behind an irregular pile of sandstone. The targeting crosshair settled over it. Tally? I have the position. Spinning up guns. 2-4. Cleared hot. Shift when complete. She rolled the aircraft into a shallow dive, compensating in her head for the 3 millirad offset Rennick had mentioned, settling the pipper slightly left of the target. Range dropping fast. She waited for the tone, for the geometry to close. Then she pressed the trigger. The 30mm cannon sounded like the world tearing. She felt it through her whole body, every round a physical shock, as the gun walked across the target area and the rock formation disappeared in a cloud of pulverized stone and fire. She broke hard left, climbing back up through the smoke. Ridgeback Actual, assess. A pause, then 2-4, the gun is down. Crew is down. Good hits. Still taking fire from the northeast ridge. Copy. Re-engaging. She turned north, found the ridge, began the calculation again. Set. She flew 2 more passes. The northeast position took both. The first pass with guns, the second with a GBU-38 she hadn't used because the first run had been close enough to the convoy that she'd been unwilling to risk the blast radius. On the second pass, the geometry was cleaner, and she put the bomb into the center of the position without hesitation. Then she cleared the smoke and came around one more time at low altitude, slow, checking the road. No more muzzle flashes. No movement from the enemy positions. Ridgeback Actual 2-4. Confirm the road is clear. What's your status? A longer pause this time. When the JTAC's voice came back, it had a different quality. Still controlled, but lower. Quieter. 2-4. Road is clear. Convoy is moving. Medical vehicles are inbound. Another pause. Who is this? What's your call sign? She thought about it for a moment. Then she keyed the radio. 24 is the cook, she said. Warthog 24, RTB. She turned the aircraft north and climbed back toward Redstone Valley. The flight line was not empty when she landed. She had expected nothing, really. A normal recovery. Maybe one or two people watching from the ops building. The kind of quiet return that would let her slip back into the kitchen before anyone processed what had happened. Instead, there were people on the tarmac. Not a crowd. Maybe 15, 20 personnel, ranging from maintenance crews to admin staff to what looked like 3 junior pilots from the ready room. Nobody was talking. They were just standing there. She taxied to pad 6, ran through the engine shutdown sequence, waited for the turbines to spool down to silence. When she climbed down the boarding ladder, Rennick was at the bottom. He looked at her without speaking, then looked at the aircraft, then looked back at her. "Guns are hot," she said. 1,100 rounds down to about 800. TGP needs a log entry for the 2 engagement runs. He nodded. Still didn't say anything. She walked past the line of people without making eye contact. She heard nothing from them. No applause, no comments, no whistles or cheers. Just silence. The particular silence of people recalibrating something inside themselves. It should have felt like vindication. It didn't feel like anything yet. She pushed through the ops building door and walked toward the commander's office. She needed to write the post-flight report before anyone else got to define what had happened out there. She needed to control the paperwork. She was halfway down the corridor when the door to the intelligence office opened, and a man she had never seen before stepped into her path. He was not in uniform. He wore civilian clothes, gray slacks, a plain dark jacket, and he was carrying a folder that was thin but sealed with a classification sticker that stopped her moving forward. He looked at her with the particular blankness of someone who has been waiting for this moment and has no intention of betraying what they know. "Captain Voss," he said, "my name is Harlan Cade. I've been looking for you for 7 months." She stared at him. "Who do you work for?" He opened the folder and held out a single photograph, a maintenance record, printed on standard form paper, with a signature at the bottom. The name on the signature was not a name she recognized, but the handwriting was. She had seen that handwriting before, on a birthday card he'd sent her the year before everything fell apart. On the notes he left in the margins of technical manuals he passed along to her when she was first learning the aircraft. Her father's handwriting. Her throat closed. "We need to talk about what he found," Cade said quietly, "before someone finds out you're back." The photograph did not waver in Cade's hand. Maya stood in the corridor and looked at it, really looked at it, the way you look at something your brain is refusing to fully process. The maintenance record was a standard AF Form 2410, the kind used to document inspection and repair work on aircraft systems. This one had been filled out by hand rather than typed, which was unusual but not unheard of in forward operating environments where the digital systems were unreliable. The entries were neat, methodical, the kind of handwriting that came from someone who had been trained to write legibly under pressure, in poor light, on surfaces that weren't always flat. She knew that handwriting. She had known it since she was 7 years old, when her father used to leave notes on the kitchen counter before early morning flights. Eggs in the pan, milk in the fridge, back by noon. Dad. The way he formed his capital letters, wide at the top and narrower at the base. The slight leftward lean of his 7s. The habit of underlining numbers he considered important. This form had 4 numbers underlined. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That was training. You could thank the Air Force for that much, at least. 2 decades of conditioning that kept your voice flat when your chest was doing something catastrophic." "That's a longer conversation," Cade said. "Not one I want to have in a hallway." She looked at him. He was perhaps 50, lean, with the kind of face that gave nothing away as a matter of professional habit. No insignia, no agency identification visible. The folder had a classification banner across the top, black text on white, but the issuing organization field had been redacted with a solid bar. "You said you've been looking for me for 7 months, she said. "That's correct?" "Why 7 months?" "Because that's when I found the original form." He glanced briefly down the corridor toward the operations area and then back to her. "And when I found it, your name was already on it, just not as the pilot who filed it." She stared at him. "Your father filed a discrepancy report against this aircraft 13 months before your crash," Cade said. He flagged an anomaly in the fly-by-wire actuator package, a specific component on the port side control surface. He logged it under his own name and submitted it through the base maintenance chain at Grayfield. Grayfield. She knew the name. Her father had been stationed there briefly, a temporary assignment during a readiness evaluation program. She had visited him there once, 3 days, during a period when her own schedule allowed it. That report was never entered into the aircraft's maintenance record, Cade continued. Someone removed it. The copy I have came from a backup filing system that was decommissioned and scheduled for data destruction 8 months ago. I pulled it before the wipe. Maya said nothing for a long moment. Down the corridor, a door opened and footsteps approached. Someone from the operations section, junior by the sound of the stride. Cade closed the folder without being asked. They both looked at their hands until the footsteps passed. I need that folder, she said. Not yet. Cade. Not yet, he repeated, quietly, but with enough firmness that she understood it wasn't a negotiation point. There are people on this installation who will want to know what's in here before you do. I need you to understand that before we go any further. She looked at him. Which people? She said. He didn't answer that. Instead, he said, When did you last speak to your father? The question landed in a specific way. Not have you spoken to him recently, or are you in contact with him, which was how someone would phrase it if they were genuinely unsure. He said, When did you last speak to him, past tense, and he said it with the careful neutrality of someone delivering the first part of information they've decided to release in stages. 14 months ago, she said. He called me after the review board's second decision. We talked for about 20 minutes. And after that? He stopped answering his phone. She kept her voice level. His commanding officer told me he'd been reassigned to a program that had communications restrictions. I filed an inquiry. The inquiry came back unresolved. She paused. I tried 3 more times over the following months. Nothing. Katie looked at her steadily. She read what was in his face before he said it, the way you sometimes can when you've been waiting for information long enough that you've already imagined every version of it. He's not on a restricted assignment, she said. No, Cade said. He's not. The corridor was quiet. Outside, somewhere on the flight line, a ground crew was running a power-on check, and the whine of it came faintly through the exterior walls. Tell me what happened to him, she said. He died, Cade said. 14 months ago, 3 days after he called you. The official cause was a single-vehicle accident on a rural road outside Grayfield. His car went off a bridge. She had known it was coming. She had known it in the part of herself she kept under lock and key, the part that looked at his silence and knew, the way you sometimes know things you're not ready to say out loud. Her hands were completely still at her sides. She made sure of that. The accident investigation concluded it was weather-related, Cade said. The road was wet. No other vehicles involved. The report was closed within 10 days. He paused. I don't believe it was an accident. Why? Because the anomaly he flagged in that aircraft component, the one that was removed from the maintenance record, is consistent with a specific type of induced mechanical failure, one that can be made to look like pilot error in the post-incident analysis. He let that settle. And because the man whose name appears on the falsified maintenance entry that replaced your father's report died in a separate incident 4 months later, off base, his death was ruled a heart attack. Maya had stopped breathing normally. She was breathing the way you breathe when you're in the middle of something and you can't afford to lose control. Deliberately, through the nose, each breath measured. You're telling me, she said slowly, that my aircraft was sabotaged, that the report flagging the fault was destroyed, that my father found out what happened, and that he was killed before he could do anything with it. I'm telling you what the evidence suggests, Cade said, not the same thing as proof. Who is behind it? That's the part I'm still building. Then why are you here? Because you just flew an unauthorized combat mission and destroyed 2 enemy positions and saved 6 soldiers, he said without emotion. And because within the next few hours, this installation is going to get a visit from people who are not going to be happy about what you just did. And some of those people may be connected to what I'm investigating. He finally looked away from her, down toward the end of the corridor. I came here to warn you and to ask for your help. She went back to the kitchen. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because it was the one place on the base where no one would think to look for her immediately, and she needed 20 minutes to think before the machinery of consequence started moving in her direction. She stood at the prep counter and didn't touch anything. Decker was at the far end of the kitchen loading a catering cart for the officers' dining room, and he glanced at her once and then looked away without speaking. Something about her expression, she supposed, had communicated that conversation was not welcome. She stood there and thought about her father. Colonel Warren Voss had spent 31 years in the Air Force, 22 of them in the A-10 community. He was not a sentimental man and not a particularly warm one, but he had been precise and honest and incapable of letting something wrong stay wrong without trying to fix it. She had inherited that from him, or learned it, and had never been certain which. He had called her after the second review board. She remembered the call with the detailed, compressed clarity that significant moments sometimes have, the way you remember them not as a general impression, but almost frame by frame, as though some part of your mind knew it was important and recorded it carefully. He had sounded angry. Not at her, never at her about the crash, not from the beginning. He had sounded angry in the direction of something she couldn't quite identify. He'd said things she hadn't fully understood at the time. This isn't sitting right, Maya. The numbers on that actuator package don't match the post-crash analysis. I'm looking into it. She had told him to be careful about making accusations he couldn't support. He had said, "I'm not making accusations. I'm reading maintenance forms." 3 days later, he was dead. She had spent 14 months pushing that sequence of events into a compartment and refusing to look at it directly because the alternative, accepting what it implied, was something she wasn't capable of functioning alongside. Not while she was still in this kitchen, still grounded, still waiting. Now Harlan Cade had opened the compartment with a single photograph in her father's handwriting, and everything she'd packed in there was sitting loose and exposed in the center of her chest. She picked up a knife from the magnetic strip above the counter, set it down again, and walked out the back door of the kitchen into the service alley behind the mess hall. The morning air was dry and hot, and smelled of exhaust from the generator units. She stood in the narrow shade of the building's overhang and looked at the sky. It was deep blue, cloudless, the kind of desert sky that looked painted. Somewhere up in it, she had spent the last hour doing the only thing she had ever been genuinely good at. Her father had taught her the A-10. Not the Air Force, her father. He had taken her up in a Cessna when she was 11, and by the time she was 12, she understood basic instrument flight. And when she got to the academy, and then to pilot training, she was already 3 steps ahead of everyone around her because Warren Voss had spent a decade giving her a foundation that no curriculum could replicate. And someone had used that aircraft, the aircraft he had helped her love, to end her career. And then they had killed him. She stood in the alley for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She counted them. Then she walked back inside. Commander Cross was waiting for her in the ops building corridor at 1100 hours. He had 2 officers with him she didn't recognize, one in uniform, one in the same kind of civilian clothes as Cade, and his expression was the face of a man managing several different problems at once and not enjoying any of them. "Captain Voss." He stopped a few feet from her. "We need to debrief the sortie. I have my notes ready." "In my office." "Of course." The 2 men with him fell in behind as they walked. The one in uniform was a lieutenant colonel, which outranked Cross in technical grade, but not in station authority, and he was watching Maya with an evaluative attention that she found specific and unpleasant. Not hostile, exactly. More like the way a surveyor looks at a piece of land they've been asked to assess. Cross closed the office door. Nobody sat. "The ground element confirmed the convoy is clear," Cross said. 6 wounded personnel have been evacuated. The JTAC filed a very positive performance report on the fire support. "Good," Maya said. "The problem," said the lieutenant colonel, whose name tag read Sutter, "is that you flew that mission without an active flight status, which makes everything about this legally complicated." Commander Cross authorized the flight. He authorized you to explore the aircraft's status. He did not, technically, authorize a combat sortie. She looked at Cross. Cross looked at the wall slightly to the left of her head. "Understood," she said. "So I flew an unauthorized mission and saved 6 lives. What happens now?" Sutter clasped his hands behind his back. "A formal review will be convened to examine the circumstances. The outcome of that review will determine your status going forward." "How long will that take?" "These things take time. And in the meantime, I go back to the kitchen. In the meantime, you are relieved of kitchen duties pending the review." He paused. You'll have access to your quarters and the base's common facilities. You will not approach the flight line or the aircraft without explicit authorization." She nodded once. "That's all," Sutter said. Cross said nothing. He hadn't looked at her directly since she walked in. She turned to leave, had her hand on the door when Cross said quietly, "Voss?" She stopped. "What you did out there?" He paused. He seemed to be working something out or suppressing something. "The convoy element. Their commander sent a personal message." She waited. "He said to tell you that Sergeant Dominguez's daughter has a father coming home." Cross stopped again. His jaw moved. "That's all." She opened the door and walked out. Cade found her at 1400 hours, sitting on the steps of the rear entrance to the support barracks. She had her notebook open on her knee, the same one she'd been using for kitchen inventory, and she was writing in it a list of dates and names that had been forming in her head for the past 3 hours. He sat beside her without asking if it was all right. "Sutter," she said. "Who is he? Which office sent him, or what is he personally?" "Both. He's from the Inspector General's office, officially, Combat Readiness Evaluation Section." Cade kept his voice low and even, the way people talk outdoors when they don't know who might be nearby. "Unofficially, he spent the last 2 years working an audit of maintenance procurement contracts in 3 commands. He turned up anomalies in the billing records at Grayfield that led him to a contracting firm called Veritas Mechanical Services." She wrote the name in her notebook. "Veritas holds service contracts on roughly 40% of the A-10 fleet in this theater," Cade said. "The anomalies in the billing aren't just accounting irregularities. They appear to correspond with aircraft that experienced mechanical incidents of undetermined cause." "How many incidents?" 11 over a 4-year period. 2 fatal. 3 with pilot injuries, 6 where the pilot walked away and the aircraft was destroyed." He paused. "Your crash is number 7. She looked at the list she'd been making. She crossed out a date she'd written incorrectly and rewrote it. "My father found the original discrepancy report," she said. "He filed it at Grayfield. Someone at Grayfield pulled it before it entered the permanent record." "Yes. That means whoever manages the maintenance records at Grayfield is either involved or was pressured. Or both. And the technician name on the falsified form, we traced it to a contractor employee, Marcus Teal, who was listed as an active Veritas technician at the time of your crash. He died 4 months later." "Teal," she said. She wrote it down. "The heart attack was real as far as we can determine. He was 53 and had an existing cardiac condition. But the timing is convenient. Extremely." She closed the notebook, held it in both hands. "You said I need to help you. What does that mean, specifically?" "There is a financial audit trail buried in the Veritas contracting files that would connect the maintenance manipulation to an officer inside the procurement division," Cade said. "We know the trail exists. We can't access the records directly without triggering an alert that could cause the files to disappear. We need someone to retrieve a physical copy of a specific document from the contracting office on this installation." She turned to look at him. "You want me to pull a document from a secured contracting office? I want you to retrieve a contract modification addendum filed under procurement case number Delta 7 Foxtrot Niner 2. It's a standard form document that shouldn't be in a secured system, but it's been stored there by someone who wanted it inaccessible. The contracting office is accessible during standard duty hours. The document room is locked, but the administrative NCO who runs it, Sergeant Fielder," Maya said. Cade stopped. "I know Fielder," she said. "She's been on this base for 3 years. She eats breakfast in the mess hall at 07:30 every morning. She has 2 kids. Her youngest is starting school in the fall." She looked at Cade. "She's not part of this." "No, she's not." "Then I'm not putting her at risk. I'm not asking you to." He reached into his jacket and produced a single index card. On it was a printed sequence of letters and numbers. "The document is also stored digitally in the contracting system under that access code. The terminal in the administrative processing room on the 2nd floor of the operations building can access it. That room is unlocked during duty hours and is typically unoccupied between 1300 and 1400. She looked at the card. "It's 14:15 now." "I know. You're a day late." "Then tomorrow." She took the card, held it. "Cade," she said, What happens after I get the document? Assuming it says what you think it says. It goes to 3 separate oversight bodies simultaneously: IG, JAG, and an external audit committee that's been monitoring the Veritas contract group for 18 months. The simultaneous filing removes the ability of any single person inside the system to suppress it. And the people responsible for my crash, addressed through the investigation that follows. And my father. Cade was quiet for a moment. Your father's case is separate, he said. The crash investigation is within reach of the existing evidence. His death, he stopped. His death requires more. She sat with that. What kind of more? The kind that takes time, and the kind that will require someone who knew him and knew the aircraft to provide context that a financial document alone can't give. He looked at her. You flew today, and it went on record. Whatever they decide in that review, your name is in the operational logs of this base for the first time in over 2 years. That matters. Because it's harder to make me disappear again. Yes. She looked out at the base. The afternoon had gotten hotter, the kind of still, heavy heat that settled in the desert afternoon and didn't move until sundown. Somewhere across the compound, she could hear a vehicle backing up and the sound of a hangar door rolling on its track. My father trusted the system to handle what he found, she said. He went through channels. He filed the form. He made the report. Yes. And they killed him for it. Cade said nothing. I'm not going through channels, she said. I'm not asking you to. She stood up, tucked the notebook under her arm, looked down at him. There's something else, she said. It wasn't a question. He met her eyes. The particular blankness in his face had shifted, just slightly, not to vulnerability, but to something adjacent to it. The expression of someone who has been carrying information that cost them something. The officer, I believe, is connected to the procurement manipulation, he said. The one whose financial trail is in those contract records. Who is it? He told her. She stood very still. The name he said was not a stranger's name. It was not an abstract name from a file or a report. It was a name she knew from dinners and promotion ceremonies, and the kind of professional familiarity that accumulates over years in a small community where everyone knows everyone eventually. It was a name that explained several things at once: why the review board had been slow, why the inquiry about her father had gone unresolved, why certain doors had remained consistently closed during the 2 years she'd been trying to understand what happened to her. Are you certain? She said. 90%. What's the 10%? The 10% is the document you're going to pull tomorrow. She looked at him for a long moment. The desert heat pressed against them both. A fighter jet crossed the sky somewhere high overhead. Not from this base, from somewhere else. A distant sound like a seam being torn in something. And she watched the contrail without moving. I need something from you, she said. What? I need the full copy of my father's discrepancy report. Not the photograph. The full form. Every entry he made. I can get that to you by tonight. And I need to know where he was in the 48 hours before he died. Kate hesitated. It was the first time she'd seen him hesitate, and it told her that this was the part he'd been deciding whether to share. He was at a meeting, Cade said, off-base, civilian location, with an individual he'd contacted through an outside channel. Someone he apparently trusted but had not identified by name in his notes. He paused. We know where the meeting took place. We don't know who he met. I might, Maya said. Cade looked at her. My father didn't have many people he trusted, she said. And when he went outside channels, he went to the same one every time. She turned and started back toward the barracks door. I'll have the document tomorrow. You get me the full form tonight. She pulled the door open. Captain Voss. She stopped. There is a man named Borland, Cade said. Vincent Borland. He's a senior contract manager in the Veritas regional office. In the last 3 weeks, he has made 2 visits to this installation that are not logged in the standard visitor system. His voice remained level. I don't know what he came here for, but I know he left both times through the maintenance section. She stood in the doorway with the hot air at her back and the cool dark of the corridor in front of her. If Borland comes back, she said, I want to know immediately. Agreed. And Cade. She looked back at him over her shoulder. The document I'm pulling tomorrow, if it says what you think it says, there are people on this installation who will know it's gone within 24 hours. Likely. Then we need to move faster than they expect. That's been my plan from the beginning. She went inside. The corridor was dim after the outdoor brightness, and she walked it slowly, letting her eyes adjust. Her mind was already working through the next 18 hours. The layout of the second floor of the ops building, the duty roster for administrative processing, the access code on the index card, and the name Cade had told her, sitting at the center of everything like a load-bearing wall she was going to have to knock down. She reached her quarters, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. From her jacket pocket, she pulled the index card, studied it. Then she pulled out the notebook and opened it to a new page. At the top, she wrote the name Cade had given her. She underlined it. Then she began to plan. She was still writing at midnight when the envelope slid under her door. No knock. No footsteps she could hear approaching or retreating. Whoever Cade had sent moved quietly, which told her something about the kind of people he worked with. She picked the envelope up from the floor and opened it at her desk under the single lamp she'd left on. Inside was a full-size copy of her father's AF Form 2410. 8 pages, not one. The photograph Cade had shown her in the corridor had been a single page. The signature sheet, the last one. The complete form was something else entirely. Warren Voss had been thorough in the way that men of his generation and his profession were thorough. Not obsessively, not anxiously, but with the quiet completeness of someone who understood that the record you made today might be the only thing standing between a functioning aircraft and a catastrophic failure next month. Every entry was dated. Every measurement was noted with the instrument used to take it. Every anomaly he'd detected in the port-side actuator package had been described in plain, specific language that required no interpretation. He had found the problem on a Tuesday. He had re-examined it on Wednesday to verify. He had filed the report on Thursday morning. He was dead on a Sunday. 6 days. She read the form 3 times. By the second reading, she had a legal pad next to her and was copying the specific measurements he'd recorded. The actuator displacement values, the pressure variance at 2 points in the control surface cycle, the hydraulic fluid sample notation that suggested contamination of a very particular type. By the third reading, she had stopped copying and was just sitting with the numbers, letting her engineering training and her flight experience work on them together. He was right. She could see it clearly now, with 2 years of distance and the knowledge of what had happened to her aircraft on that Tuesday morning over the southern range. The values he'd recorded were the precursor signature of the failure she had experienced. If the report had been entered into the maintenance record, the aircraft would have been grounded for inspection. The fault would have been found. The component would have been replaced, or the aircraft taken out of service. She would have flown a different aircraft that day. She would still be flying. She set the papers down on the desk and looked at the wall for a while. Then she turned off the lamp and lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, and did not sleep. At 0600 she was in the mess hall. Not working, her kitchen duties had been suspended pending the review, as Sutter had told her. She sat at the far end of the staff table with a cup of coffee and watched the morning rush without participating in it. Decker was running the line. He was not doing it well, so the egg trays were low and he hadn't noticed, and the coffee station was running out of cups. But she didn't move to fix it. That wasn't her kitchen anymore. She was done with that kitchen. At 0725, Sergeant Adele Fielder came through the mess hall door in her press duty uniform, carrying a phone in one hand and a thermos in the other, moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had exactly enough time to eat breakfast before her duty shift started and intended to use every minute of it. Maya watched her go through the line, watched her find a seat at the NCO table near the windows, watched her eat quickly and check her phone and eat some more. She did not approach her. Cade had been clear that Fielder was not part of the network, and Maya had her own ethical line about pulling civilians and uninvolved personnel into a situation they hadn't chosen. What she did do was look at the clock on the mess hall wall and calculate. Fielder would finish breakfast in approximately 8 minutes. She would be at her desk in the contracting office administrative suite by 0800. Between 1300 and 1400 today, that suite would be unoccupied. Maya had the access code. She had the case number. She had 6 hours. The ops building's second floor was not a place she spent time regularly, but she knew its layout from the base familiarization briefing she'd received when she arrived at Redstone Valley, which all new personnel received regardless of assignment. The administrative processing room was at the end of the east corridor. A standard layout, 1 terminal, 2 printers, a filing cabinet, no window. used primarily for records requests and contract documentation by personnel who needed hard copies of administrative files. At 13:08, she walked up the stairs, turned right, walked to the end of the corridor, and went inside. The terminal took 40 seconds to boot. The access code Cade had given her worked on the first attempt, which she had not taken for granted. The contracting system's interface was familiar. She'd used a similar one during her time at Grayfield for procurement paperwork related to the aircraft readiness program, and she found the case number field without difficulty. Delta 7 Foxtrot, Niner 2. The system returned a single document, a contract modification addendum, 14 pages, filed under a Veritas Mechanical Services procurement case. She clicked through the pages quickly, not reading deeply yet, just scanning for the elements Cade had described. On page 9, she found the financial schedule. She looked at the amendment numbers. She looked at the authorization signatures. The second signature on the amendment was a name she recognized. She printed all 14 pages, folded them inside a maintenance manual she'd brought under her arm as cover, and was out of the room by 13:22 Chet. She passed Sutter in the first-floor corridor. He was walking with two officers she didn't know, talking about something she couldn't hear, and he registered her presence with a brief glance and then looked away. She kept her pace even, didn't slow down. The manual under her arm weighed nothing, and the 14 pages inside it felt like they weighed everything. She reached the stairwell exit, pushed through into the exterior courtyard, and walked steadily toward the support barracks. Nobody stopped her. She had been afraid, not of getting caught in the room, but of what came after, the part where the information she now had in her possession became a liability, where carrying it made her a target the same way her father had become a target when he carried his. She understood now, with a clarity she hadn't fully had before, why they had moved against him so quickly. 6 days was not a long time. It was long enough to realize that someone had found what they'd hidden, and to decide that the simplest solution was to remove the someone. She thought about that as she crossed the courtyard. She kept walking. She met Cade at 1500 hours at the vehicle maintenance bay on the northwest corner of the installation. His suggestion, a location with enough ambient noise and mechanical activity that conversation was difficult to surveil. He read through the document at a standing height against the side of a storage container, turning pages without expression. When he finished, he started from the beginning. The amendment modifies the per-unit component service fee, he said, without looking up. On its face, it looks like a routine pricing correction. Look at the adjustment schedule on page 11, Maya said. He turned to it. The schedule broke the fee adjustments down by aircraft tail number. Most of the entries were standard, but 6 tail numbers had been marked with a separate billing code, one that wasn't explained anywhere in the document's glossary. Her aircraft had been one of the 6. The billing code, Cade said. Routes to a separate cost center, Maya said. Not Veritas's main account, a secondary account. Look at the authorization signature on page 9. He turned back. Looked at it for a long time. The name on the signature was Brigadier General Paul Witter, Deputy Director of Maintenance Procurement, Tactical Air Systems. She watched Cade's face. Even with his professional blankness, something shifted. Witter, he said quietly. Is that the 10%? She said. He looked up from the document. No, he said. Witter is someone I didn't know to look for. He turned the page again. This isn't just a connection to the Veritas billing anomalies. This is authorization. Witter approved the billing structure that created the secondary account. If the secondary account is what I think it is, it's a payment record for specific contract actions, Maya said. Maintenance actions on specific aircraft. The 6 tail numbers. Which means whoever owns the secondary account received payment corresponding to those aircraft. And my aircraft was one of them. The maintenance bay was loud. An engine somewhere at the back was being tested, a grinding, rhythmic sound that filled the space, and they both stood in it for a moment without speaking. Witter is not the person I named to you yesterday, Cade said carefully. No, Maya said. He's not. Which means there are at least 2 people above him. Cade looked at the document again, then he tucked it carefully inside his jacket. I need to transmit this tonight. To all 3. Yes. And Witter? Will be notified through the IG chain the moment this lands. He paused. That gives us roughly 12 hours before anyone connected to Witter knows the document is out of the system. Then 12 hours is what we have, she said. What she hadn't told Cade, what she'd decided during the 6 hours between retrieving the document and meeting him, was that the document was not the only thing she'd found. While the contract system was loading the addendum, she had run a secondary search under the Veritas company name, a search that the access code Cade had given her technically authorized. The results had returned several related filings. Most of them were routine, one was not. It was a visitor log entry from 8 months ago, a record of a meeting held in the Redstone Valley contracting office between a Veritas representative and a base official. The Veritas representative's name was Vincent Borland. The base official's name was listed as a title only, Senior Oversight Liaison, because whoever had filed the entry had either been careless or had decided that the title was sufficient. But the date and the time matched a gap in Commander Cross's official calendar that she had seen referenced in a base administration document during her first month in the kitchen, when she'd been asked to help with a catering order for an unofficial working lunch. She had not been certain then. She was not certain now. But she remembered that Cross had been gone from his office that afternoon. She remembered because she had delivered the catering order to his outer office, and his aide had told her to leave it, and that the commander wouldn't be back until the following morning. The same afternoon, Borland had met with the senior oversight liaison in the contracting office. She kept this to herself, not because she distrusted Cade, but because she had learned in the past 24 hours that the value of information was directly connected to who knew you had it. If Cross was involved, and she was not yet certain he was, not in the way that Witter was involved, then she needed to understand the shape of his involvement before she handed it to anyone. She walked back to the barracks as the afternoon sun began to flatten against the western edge of the plateau. The call came at 17:45. Her room phone, the landline, which almost nobody used, rang twice and stopped, then rang once more, then twice again. She picked it up on the next ring. Voss. The voice on the other end was not Cade. It was lower, older, and she didn't recognize it immediately. Then she did, not from memory, but from a recording. A voice briefing she'd attended 2 years ago during a readiness conference at Grayfield, a presentation given by a senior intelligence officer whose name she hadn't retained but whose voice she had apparently stored somewhere in the back of her mind. "You don't know me," the voice said. "Your father did." She kept her voice flat. "What do you want?" "To tell you that you have less time than your current associate thinks you do." A pause. "The document you retrieved this afternoon was flagged the moment the access code was used. Not by the system is clean, by a monitor on the specific terminal. Someone put a tripwire on that terminal 6 weeks ago." Her jaw tightened. She held the phone. "How long?" she said. "You have until 0600 tomorrow before Borland's people move. There's a man named Keys. He's on base. He arrived this morning as a contractor support technician. He's not a technician. He's there to recover the document and manage the situation." "Manage the situation," she repeated. "You understand what that means?" She understood exactly what it meant. She also understood that this voice, whoever it was, whatever connection he'd had to her father, was telling her something that cost him something to tell, the way information always costs something when the people it implicates are powerful enough. "Why are you calling me instead of Cade?" she asked. "Because Cade doesn't know about the tripwire, and because your father trusted you to do what he couldn't finish." A brief pause. "He talked about you. He said you were better than he was." She said nothing. The silence stretched. 0600, the voice said. "Don't be where they expect." The line went dead. She set the phone down and stood very still in the middle of the room. Then she picked up the phone again and called Cade's contact number, the one he'd given her on a second index card, different from the first. It rang 4 times before he answered. "There's a tripwire on the terminal," she said, "and there's someone named Keys on the installation. We have until 0600. A long pause. "How do you know this?" Cade said. "Someone who knew my father." Another pause, different in quality from the first. "Keys," he said. Then, "That changes the timeline." "Yes. The transmission needs to go tonight, all 3. Can you do it from here?" "Not safely. There's a secure comm terminal at the regional IG field office in Dalton. That's 60 miles. She looked at the window. The sun was going down. Full dark in an hour and a half. "Get to Dalton," she said. "I'll deal with Keys." "Voss?" "Get to Dalton, Cade. She found Sergeant Rennick at 1758, in the maintenance bay where he'd been logging the post-flight data from her morning sortie. He looked up when she came in and did not look surprised to see her, which she appreciated. "Crew chief," she said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly." "Generally try to," he said. "The man who arrived this morning with the contractor support team, Keyes, do you know where he is right now?" Rennick set down his stylus. His expression shifted, not alarm exactly, but the look of someone adjusting to a new calibration of how serious things are. "He was in the maintenance section at 15:30, Rennick said, "asking questions about the avionics logs on the aircraft you flew this morning." "What kind of questions?" "Whether there were anomalies in the flight data recording, whether the TGP engagement log had been transferred to the ops system yet." He paused. "I told him it was standard procedure to do the transfer within 24 hours. He asked if it could be accelerated." "What did you say?" "Said I'd need authorization from the flight operations officer." He looked at her steadily. "Which I don't actually need. I was buying time because something about him felt wrong." "It was wrong," she said. "He's not here about avionics logs. He's here for something else, and I need you to stay out of his way tonight." "And you're going to handle it." Rennick was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stylus in his hand, then set it on the bench. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a man who came through the maintenance section this afternoon and spent 30 minutes in the record storage area. I assumed he had authorization. Should I have asked to see it?" She looked at him. "Did he have it?" "I'd have to check the log." "Check the log, crew chief. If his authorization isn't properly documented, that's an administrative matter. File a discrepancy notice before you go off shift." He held her gaze, understood exactly what she was asking. Not that he fabricate anything, but that he do by the book what he should have done earlier, which would put Keyes' presence in the records section on official record before anything else happened. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She walked out of the maintenance bay into the thickening evening air. She found Keyes at 1920. It wasn't difficult. There were only so many places a newly arrived contractor could reasonably be at that hour. The mess hall, the visitor billeting block, or the operations building. She checked the mess hall first because it was closest. He wasn't there. She checked visitor billeting second, walking past the building from the road, and saw a light in room 4. She didn't knock on the door. Instead, she went to the payphone near the visitor check-in point, an artifact that still worked because the base communications officer had never prioritized removing it, and she called the duty desk in base operations. "Duty desk, Corporal Wren. This is Captain Voss. I need to report a potential security concern. A contractor arrived this morning named Keyes. I don't have a first name. He's been in the maintenance records section without documented authorization. I'm recommending a credential verification before 1800 access cutoff." A pause. "Captain, it's already past 1800. "Then I'm recommending immediate verification." Another pause. "I'll need to contact the contractor liaison." "Do it," she said. "Document the call." She hung up. It wouldn't stop Keyes. It would slow him down. Get someone to his door. Put him in a conversation he didn't want to have. Give him a problem to manage that would occupy his attention for at least an hour. An hour was enough. She walked to the ops building, took the stairs to the second floor, and went back to the administrative processing room. This time she wasn't looking for a document. She sat down at the terminal, used the same access code, and opened the contracting system's visitor log module. She found the entry she'd seen earlier, the one from 8 months ago, the one with the date and time that matched the gap in Cross's calendar, and she printed it. Then she opened the access audit log, which showed every user who had accessed the system in the past 30 days. The access code Cade had given her had been used once before her retrieval today, 3 weeks ago, by a terminal in the visitor processing suite on the first floor. She stared at that entry for a moment. Borland had been here 3 weeks ago. He had used the same access code, which meant either Cade's code had been compromised, or Borland had his own route into the system that happened to use the same credentials, or the code had been given to Borland by the same source that had given it to Cade. She printed the audit log. She walked out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the ops building into the night air. The desert had cooled quickly, the way it always did, dropping 10 degrees in the first hour after dark. The sky overhead was clear and dense with stars, the kind of sky you only got at altitude and in dry air, and she stood in it for a moment and breathed. Her phone, the personal cell, not the landline, buzzed in her pocket. Cade. A text. On the road to Dalton, 45 minutes out. Confirm document status. She typed back. Document is with you. Find out who gave you the access code. 3 minutes of silence. Then, what? Borland used the same code 3 weeks ago. Same terminal building. A longer silence. Then, that's not possible. The code came from... He stopped mid-message. Started again. I'll explain when I'm back. Stay where you are. She put the phone in her pocket. She did not stay where she was. She walked to the commander's building, not to cross his office, which would be empty at this hour, but to the outer administrative suite, where the duty aide maintained the official scheduling calendar in a shared system she had accessed exactly once before during the catering order incident. The calendar confirmed it. 8 months ago, on the date of Borland's logged visit, Commander Ethan Cross had blocked his schedule with the notation, off-site consult, no detail required. She stood looking at the calendar entry for a long time. She thought about the 5th time she'd spoken to Cross, in his office, the day she flew. The way he'd told her the facts of the convoy situation without technically ordering her to act on them. The way he'd positioned himself so that if the flight went wrong, the decision was hers. And the way afterward, in the debrief, he hadn't looked at her directly. She'd read that as guilt about how she'd been treated. Shame about the 2 years of kitchen duty. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the particular discomfort of a man who wasn't sure how much she knew. She was back in her quarters at 2100 when someone knocked on the door. Not the careful knock of Cade or one of his people. A hard, official knock. The knock of someone who expected the door to open promptly. She opened it. Sutter stood in the corridor, and behind him were 2 men in civilian clothes she had not seen before. And behind them was the specific quality of atmosphere that arrives when something has shifted beyond the point where normal institutional processes apply. Captain Voss, Sutter said, you need to come with us. She looked at him, then past him at the 2 men. On what grounds? She said. There's been a security incident in the administrative processing suite. You were logged accessing the contracting system at 1308 and again at 1930. He paused. The second access was outside authorized hours and involved an audit log module you don't have clearance for. She had known this was coming. She had accepted it when she printed the audit log, the same way you accept the cost of a thing when you decide the thing is worth it. I'd like to make a phone call, she said. You can make a call from the security office. She looked at Sutter's face. I was doing his job. She was fairly sure of that. Whatever was behind this particular knock on this particular door, Sutter believed he was executing a legitimate security response, because the person who had sent him had made it look like one. Sutter, she said quietly, are you aware that a man named Vincent Borland accessed the same contracting system 3 weeks ago, using the same access code I used tonight? Something moved in Sutter's expression. I wasn't, he said. I printed the audit log, she said. It's on my desk. She stepped back from the door to let him see the papers on the desk surface, the printed log sitting on top of the visitor entry from 8 months ago. Check the date on the visitor log under it, then check Commander Cross's official calendar for the same date. Sutter looked at the papers from the doorway. He did not move toward them. One of the civilian men behind him said, Colonel? Wait, Sutter said. The corridor was quiet. Sutter looked at the papers on the desk for a long moment. Then he looked at Maya. She could see it happening, the recalibration, the same thing that had happened in Rennick's face when she'd walked up to the aircraft in her flight suit, except this version of it was more complicated and more dangerous because what Sutter was recalibrating was not just his assessment of one person, but the entire situation he thought he understood when he knocked on her door. Those papers, he said carefully. Where did they come from? The contracting system, she said, which I accessed using a code provided to me by an individual conducting an authorized investigation. The same code, used by the same individual, that someone else used 3 weeks ago. She paused. I'd like to know who authorized that prior access, and I'd like to know why nobody flagged it. Sutter was quiet for what felt like a long time. Stand by, he said finally. He took a step back into the corridor and spoke in a low voice to one of the men behind him. Maya couldn't hear the words, but she read the body language, a man issuing instructions that contradicted whatever instructions he'd arrived with. The civilian man's posture shifted, resistant, then relented. Sutter turned back to her. You will not leave these quarters until I return, he said. Understood, she said. He looked at the papers on the desk once more. Then he and his people walked back down the corridor. Maya stood in her open doorway and listened to their footsteps fade. Then she went to the desk, sat down, and picked up the phone. She dialed Cade's number. He answered on the second ring. I'm 5 minutes from the Dalton office. Transmit everything the moment you're in the building, she said. Don't wait for confirmation from me. Don't wait for anything. What's happened? Sutter came to my quarters. He's not hostile, not fully, but someone used the access flag on the terminal to send him. The same person who set the tripwire. She paused. Transmit now, Cade. If the files land in all 3 offices tonight, none of what happens here in the next 6 hours changes the outcome. A brief silence. Then, understood. Transmitting on arrival. There's one more thing. She looked at this visitor log printout. Borland's first visit to this installation was 8 months ago. His second was 3 weeks ago. You told me there were 2 visits not logged in the standard visitor system, but the one 8 months ago is in the contracting system's log. Someone logged it in the wrong place, Cade said. Or someone logged it where they thought nobody would look, she said. And the name of the base official he met is redacted, but the scheduling data matches Cross. A longer pause. When Cade spoke again, his voice was careful and precise, the voice of someone narrowing something down. Cross knew about the Veritas contract structure. It looks that way. And Sutter came to your door tonight. Yes. Did Cross send Sutter? She thought about it, the scheduling data, the visitor log, Cross's face in the debrief, not looking at her. I don't know, she said honestly, but I think Sutter is about to find out. She heard Cade exhale slowly. I'll transmit everything. Get some sleep if you can. You know I won't. I know, he said. But I said it anyway. She hung up. Outside her window, the base was quiet under a dome of desert stars. Somewhere across the installation, in the visitor billeting block, a light was still on in room 4. She looked at it for a moment, then pulled the curtain across. She picked up the legal pad, added 3 lines to the list she'd been building. Witter's name, Borland's name, and at the bottom, with a question mark that she drew slowly and then stared at for a long time before she put the pen down. Cross. She lay down on the bed in her clothes again, the same way she had the night before, and looked at the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a jet crossed the sky at altitude, distant, barely audible, a sound at the edge of perception. She tracked it by sound alone until it faded west, out over the desert, into the dark where she couldn't follow it. She closed her eyes. At 0300, her door opened. She was already sitting up before the latch finished moving, already on her feet when the figure in the doorway resolved into someone she recognized. Not Sutter, not Cade, not anyone she had expected. Someone whose presence here, at this hour, in this room, told her that the 12 hours she thought she had were already gone. Captain Voss, said Commander Cross. His face was gray, not with age, with something that had happened recently in the last few hours and had taken color from him. They've taken Cade, he said. She didn't ask him how he knew about Cade. That was the first thing, the thing she decided in the half-second between they've taken Cade and her next breath. If Cross knew about Cade, then either Cross had been watching her closely enough to identify him, or Cross had been told. Either answer meant that the shape of Cross's involvement was more complicated than a name in a visitor log, and she needed to understand which version she was dealing with before she said anything she couldn't take back. Come in, she said. He stepped inside. She moved to the desk chair and sat, leaving him the wall to lean against or the edge of the bed to use if he wanted, neither of which he took. He stood in the middle of the room with his arms at his sides and his gray face and the expression of a man who had spent the last several hours arriving at a decision that cost him. She waited. I know what you found in the contracting system, he said, both times. Then you know about the visitor log, she said. Yes. And your calendar? Yes. She looked at him. So tell me what the meeting was. He was quiet for a moment. The base was deeply still around them. The particular stillness of 0300 at a desert installation, when the overnight security patrols were the only movement and everything else had shut down to minimum function. She could hear the low hum of the generator units outside and nothing else. 8 months ago, Borland contacted me directly, Cross said, not through the contractor liaison office. He contacted me personally, through a back channel I won't explain right now. He said he was conducting an internal compliance review for Veritas and had concerns about a specific set of maintenance records connected to your crash. He came to you about my crash, she said. He said he'd found irregularities. Said a technician named Teal had altered documents, that Teal had acted without authorization, and that Veritas was trying to clean up the liability exposure before it became a legal problem. He paused. He asked me to keep the meeting confidential. He said the irregularities would be corrected through an internal process, and I'd receive documentation confirming it. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him, Cross said, which was different and honest, and she gave him credit for the honesty, even as it made her stomach tighten. If it was true, if Teal had acted alone and Veritas was genuinely correcting it, then the situation was manageable. Your crash was a maintenance failure attributable to a single bad actor, and the path forward was a quiet remediation and a review of your case. But you didn't push for the review of my case, she said. He said nothing. You put me back in the kitchen, she said. The review board does what the station commander recommends, she said. You know that. He still said nothing, which was its own answer. She let the silence sit for a moment, then, what changed tonight? Sutter came to me after he came to your quarters, Cross said. He showed me the audit log you printed. He showed me the visitor entry. His jaw moved. I told him about the meeting with Borland, all of it. Sutter spent the next 2 hours making calls. What did the calls produce? Borland's second visit, the one 3 weeks ago. Sutter tracked it. Cross's voice dropped slightly. Borland wasn't here for a compliance review. He was here because someone told him the access code to the contracting system had been given to an outside investigator. He came to set the tripwire on the terminal. Someone told him, Maya repeated. Who? We don't know yet. She looked at him. Cross. Someone on this installation is connected to Borland and to Witter. The same network that managed my crash, that removed my father's maintenance report, that had Teal file a falsified record. That network has been operating inside this command for years. She paused. And Cade is gone. I know. So where is he? He reached the Dalton IG field office, Cross said. He got inside. The transmission went out. All 3 recipients confirmed receipt, but when he left the building, 2 men were waiting for him in the parking area. She was on her feet before she was aware of standing. He's alive, Cross said quickly. Sutter has confirmation from the Dalton City Police. They responded to a report of a disturbance in the parking area. Cade was identified and is currently in police custody, which at the moment is actually the safest place for him to be. They can't touch him there without making noise. She stood, breathing, processing. The transmission went out, she said. Yes. Then the document is in 3 offices. Yes. She sat back down slowly. Then they've lost the document as a tool. They can't suppress it anymore. She looked at Cross. Which means Keyes and whoever sent him shift objectives. They're not here to recover the document anymore. They're here to discredit it, or to discredit the people connected to it, which includes you, Cross said. Which has always included me, she said. That's not new. She looked at him steadily. What's new is that you're in my quarters at 0300 instead of letting this play out from behind your desk. So tell me what you actually want. He looked at the floor, then back at her. I want to fix this. Fixing it means testifying about the meeting with Borland, on record, in detail. I know. It means acknowledging that you received information suggesting my crash was a maintenance failure and you didn't act on it. I know that too. And it means explaining to a review board why a pilot who shouldn't have been in a kitchen for 2 years was in one anyway. His jaw tightened, not with resistance, with the specific muscular response of someone absorbing something they've already decided to absorb. Yes, he said. All of it. She held his gaze. She was not forgiving him. She was not sure she was capable of it, and she wasn't going to pretend she was just because the situation required cooperation. But she also understood the difference between what a person deserved and what was useful. And right now, Cross being willing to testify was more useful than anything else he could offer her. Sutter, she said. Is he clean? As far as I can determine. And he knows everything you just told me. He knows about Borland. He knows about the visitor log. He knows the transmission went out. Cross paused. He doesn't know about your father's form. She looked up. I saw it on your desk when he showed me the audit log printout, Cross said. The AF Form 2410. I recognized the case notation. It matched the form reference Borland mentioned in our meeting, the one he said Teal had falsified. He stopped. I didn't tell Sutter what it was. I needed to talk to you first. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because your father filed that form, he said. And 8 months after Borland told me it had been handled internally, Warren Voss is dead. And I've been sitting with that since the night Sutter showed up at my door with the audit log printout. And I needed you to know that I understand what I participated in, even if it was by inaction. The room was very still. Maya looked at the form on her desk, then at Cross. My father went through channels, she said. He filed the form correctly, through the official process, and it was pulled from the record and he was killed. She paused. I need you to understand something, Commander. When I testify about what I found, and I will testify, I'm going to be specific about every decision that was made after my crash, including the ones made at the station command level. I know. I'm not protecting you. I'm not asking you to. She nodded once. Then here's what happens now. You call Sutter and get him back here. I'm going to walk both of you through the complete chain of evidence. My father's form, the contract addendum, the audit log, the visitor log, Cade's investigation, all of it. We document everything before 6 o'clock, and we make sure it's in Sutter's hands in a format he can act on regardless of what Keyes or anyone else does in the next 24 hours. That's going to take all night, Cross said. Then we'd better start, she said. Sutter arrived at OH 340. He was in civilian clothes, a dark pullover and slacks, which meant he'd been awake when Cross called and hadn't been to bed yet, which told Maya that Sutter's night had been as busy as hers. He came in with a legal pad and a digital recorder, set both on the desk without asking, and looked at Maya with the focused attention of a man who has spent a career separating what matters from what doesn't. Start from the beginning, he said, not from yesterday, from the crash. So she did. She talked for 90 minutes without significant interruption. She went through the flight, the recovery attempt, the ejection, the impact. She described the post-crash investigation process, the 6-week timeline, the interviews, the simulator reconstructions, the final report. She described the review board proceedings, the 3 hearings, the kitchen assignment, the 2 years. Then she described what her father had told her on the phone, his exact words, as precisely as she could reconstruct them, and what had happened in the 6 days between that call and his death. She described Cade's approach, the photographs, the meeting in the corridor, the full contents of the Form 2410 as she understood them. She described the contract addendum, the secondary billing code, Witter's signature. She described Borland's visits and the tripwire and the caller who had warned her about Keyes. Sutter wrote continuously. He interrupted 3 times. Once to ask her to repeat the specific actuator measurements her father had recorded, once to clarify the timeline between the Borland meeting and her father's death, and once, at the end, quietly, to ask her to describe her father. She hadn't expected that last one. Why? She said. Because when I write this up, Sutter said, I need the review board to understand who Warren Voss was and why he filed that form. If he's just a name attached to a document, they'll treat him like a data point. If he's a person, they'll treat him like a person. He paused. That matters for how the death investigation goes. She looked at him. The Dalton City Police are holding Cade, Sutter said. I've already been in contact with the JAG field office. His situation will be resolved this morning, but the men who took him, we need to trace them back. And the trail goes through understanding why they felt threatened enough to move against him after the transmission was already out. Because the document doesn't operate by itself, Maya said. It needs people who can explain it. Cade can explain the financial chain. I can explain the aircraft failure. She paused. Without us, the document is just numbers on a form. Exactly, Sutter said. They can't suppress the document, so they suppress the witnesses. My father was the first witness, she said. Yes. She told Sutter about her father. She kept it factual, the way Warren Voss himself would have kept it. Service record, aircraft experience, professional reputation within the A-10 community. But she also told him the things that weren't in the service record. The Cessna, when she was 11. The technical manuals with notes in the margins. The phone call that was the last time she heard his voice. She told it without ornamentation, in plain language, and kept her own voice level throughout. When she finished, Sutter set down his pen. Cross was sitting in the corner of the room, quiet for the last 40 minutes, and he was looking at the wall. "There is one more thing," Maya said. Both men looked at her. She reached into the legal pad she'd been keeping her notes on and pulled out a folded page. The page she hadn't shared with Cade, the one she'd been holding back. She unfolded it and set it on the desk. "When I printed the audit log from the contracting system," she said, "I also ran a search on the Veritas company name. This came up. A secondary billing record for a regional account under the Veritas umbrella routed through a holding company called Cairn Group. The transactions in the secondary account correspond date by date with the anomaly entries in the contract addendum." Sutter picked up the page. "The account holder for the Cairn Group transactions," Maya said, "is listed as a trust. The trust's registered agent is a law firm in the capital. The law firm's client roster is not public." She paused. "But Cade identified the trust before he left for Dalton. He told me the beneficial owner is on record in a sealed deposition connected to a separate federal investigation." "Who is it?" Sutter said. "Witter's name is on the contract addendum," she said. "But Witter doesn't benefit directly from the billing anomalies. The money moves through the Cairn Group account and into the trust, and the trust disperses quarterly." She looked at Sutter. "Cade told me the beneficial owner is a serving 3-star. He didn't give me the name. He said he was protecting the chain of custody on that information until the transmission was complete and the documents were in multiple hands." Sutter set down the page. He and Cross exchanged a look. Not conspiratorial, but the look of two people registering the same altered understanding of how large this had gotten. "A 3-star, Cross said. "That's what Cade said." Cross looked at this wall again. The gray in his face had deepened to something closer to exhaustion. "They've been running this for how long?" "The earliest billing anomaly in the Veritas records goes back 6 years, Maya said. 11 aircraft incidents, 2 fatal. My crash was the 7th. She paused. "My father found it because he was thorough. He flagged it because he couldn't do otherwise. And they killed him for it within 6 days because someone senior enough to authorize a maintenance cover-up was also senior enough to authorize whatever happened on that road outside Grayfield." The room was silent. The generator hum outside was constant and indifferent. At some point in the past hour, the sky outside the window had shifted from black to the deep blue that came before dawn. Still no light, just a thinning of the dark. "I want keys identified and secured before this installation wakes up," Maya said. She wasn't asking. She looked at Sutter directly. "He's in visitor billeting, room 4. His authorization paperwork is irregular. Rennick filed the discrepancy notice last night. That's grounds for credential review and temporary detainment by the book. No improvisation needed." "I can have MP detachment at that room in 20 minutes, Sutter said. "Do it now," she said, "before 6 o'clock, before whoever sent him realizes the overnight objectives failed." Sutter was already reaching for his phone. "Wow." Keyes was detained at OH422. She wasn't there for it. She was in her quarters when Sutter called to confirm, and she received the information the same way she'd received everything else in the past 36 hours. Standing up, without visible reaction, in the room where she'd barely slept and had probably changed permanently in some way she wouldn't be able to fully assess for months. His credentials were issued through a private security contractor with a DoD facility access arrangement, Sutter told her. On paper, he was legitimate. The authorization discrepancy Rennick flagged was a small thing, a missing secondary signature on the access roster, but it was enough. He paused. "He's not talking. That's fine. We don't need him to talk right now." "No," she agreed. "You need him not to make any calls. His phone and personal devices have been secured." A pause. "Cade will be released from Dalton police custody this morning. He'll be here by noon." "And Witter?" "The IG field office in the Capitol received the transmission at 22:30 last night. They've had it for 7 hours. There will be actions taken at that level that I don't control and don't have visibility on, but the momentum is there." Another pause. "This is moving, Captain, faster than these things usually move." "Because the document is clean," she said. "The chain of custody is documented. There's no gap they can attack." "Because you and Cade did the work carefully," he said. "Yes." She thanked him and ended the call. She sat at the desk and looked at the legal pad. The list she'd been building over 2 days, names, dates, case numbers, connections, filled 3 pages now. She looked at it for a while, not reviewing it exactly, just seeing it as a whole shape, the architecture of a thing that had been invisible for years and was now in the light. Her father's name was at the top of the first page, written in the first hour when she'd started the list. She looked at it. Warren Voss had been the kind of man who filed forms correctly, who re-examined anomalies before reporting them, who kept clean records and used proper channels, and believed that the system, for all its friction and slowness, would eventually function the way it was supposed to function. He had been wrong about that, wrong in a way that killed him. She had been wrong about it too, not in the same way, but in the quieter way of someone who continues to believe that official processes will eventually reach fair conclusions, even as evidence accumulates that fairness requires more than patience. 2 years in the kitchen was 2 years of waiting for the system to correct itself. It hadn't. She had. She was not certain she felt good about that. She felt something, but it was more complicated than satisfaction, a weighted, unresolved thing that she suspected would stay weighted and unresolved for a long time. Because winning didn't unbreak what had been broken, and it didn't bring back what had been lost. She closed the legal pad. At 06:15, she went to the mess hall. Not to work. She sat at the staff table with coffee and watched the breakfast line operate under Decker's management, which was imperfect in the same ways it had always been imperfect, and she didn't fix it. Airman Decker noticed her at the table. He came over with a tray, eggs, toast, the corner pieces that were slightly overdone, and set it in front of her without being asked. "Heard you had a busy night," he said. She looked at him. He was 22 and loud, and he had never been malicious, just thoughtless in the way that people are thoughtless when they're young and haven't been given a reason to look more carefully at the people around them. "I did," she said. He stood there for a moment like he was deciding whether to say something else. "The convoy thing yesterday," he said. "Someone in the motor pool told me that it was you." He paused. "I didn't know you could fly." She picked up her fork. "Nobody did," she said. He nodded slowly. Then he went back to the line. She ate the toast. It was fine. Sutter convened a formal session in the operations building conference room at OH 900. The room was not large, and by the time everyone was seated, it was crowded in a way that felt charged. Sutter, at the head of the table, crossed to his right, 2 JAG officers who had arrived from the regional legal office at OH 800, a female officer from the IG team whose name Maya hadn't caught, and who had been on the phone continuously since she arrived, and Maya herself at the far end. Sutter opened without preamble. At 22:30 last night, a package of evidentiary documents was transmitted simultaneously to the Inspector General's office, the Judge Advocate General's Field Division, and the Air Force Audit Agency's Contract Oversight Branch. The package includes a contract modification addendum implicating a senior procurement official in a structured maintenance billing fraud, and supporting documentation establishing a connection between that fraud and a series of aircraft mechanical incidents over a 6-year period. He looked around the table. "This is now a formal investigation. Everything said in this room is on record." The JAG officer on his left, a major named Castile, young, precise, with the manner of someone accustomed to rooms becoming quieter when she spoke, set a folder on the table. "Captain Voss. I've reviewed the Form 2410 filed by Colonel Warren Voss and the post-crash investigation report from 2 years ago. I have questions." "Go ahead," Maya said. "The post-crash report concluded pilot error as the primary cause," Castile said. "Specifically, it cited improper recovery technique during a roll at low altitude. Your father's form documents a hydraulic anomaly in the portside actuator package consistent with an induced control surface failure. In your assessment, and this is not a legal question, it's a technical one, is the failure mode described in your father's form consistent with the flight behavior described in the crash report?" "Yes," Maya said. "The actuator displacement values my father recorded indicate a developing failure in the port control surface response. If that failure progressed to full loss of port control authority during a low-altitude roll, which is exactly the scenario described in the crash report, the aircraft's response would be indistinguishable from the report's description of pilot-induced instability. An investigator without access to the original discrepancy report would have no basis to look for the mechanical cause. The behavior fits both explanations. And with access to the original report, the mechanical cause is the only explanation that accounts for all the data. Pilot error becomes the residual theory, not the primary one. She paused. I've been flying A-10s for 11 years. The recovery technique the crash report criticized was textbook. I've executed it hundreds of times. If the aircraft had responded correctly, I would not have ejected. Castile made a note. Understood. One more question. She looked up. The 6 tail numbers in the contract addendum's anomalous billing schedule. You said your aircraft was one of them. Yes. Were you aware of the other 5 aircraft when you began your investigation? No, Cade identified the other incidents as part of his separate work. 2 of those incidents were fatal, Castile said. Yes, I know that now. Castile closed the folder. She and Sutter exchanged a look. General Witter is currently being interviewed by IG investigators in the Capitol, Sutter said. He said it to the room, but his eyes were on Maya. That process began at 0700 this morning. The Cairn Group financial connection has been referred to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. He paused. The 3-star whose name is in the sealed deposition. Cade will provide that information when he arrives. We are not acting on unconfirmed identification, but we are prepared to move when it's confirmed. And my crash, Maya said. The official record. Formal review of the post-crash investigation findings is being initiated today, Castile said. The specific finding of pilot error is being flagged for reassessment pending receipt of your father's complete Form 2410 and the technical analysis that will need to be conducted by an independent accident investigation board. She paused. That process takes time. How much time? Weeks, not months. Castile held her gaze. The evidence is not in dispute, Captain. The original finding will not survive an honest review of this material. Maya nodded once. She looked down at her hands on the table, then back up. My father's death, she said. The accident investigation. Sutter answered this one. That's with DCIS as of this morning. The Grayfield Road incident is being reopened as a potential homicide investigation. That's a separate track from the maintenance fraud, and it's a more difficult case to build. He paused. But it's open. And the people who would have previously had the ability to keep it closed are no longer in that position. The room was quiet. Cross, who had not spoken since the session began, said quietly, I owe a formal statement to this board about the meeting with Borland. I'll give it today, on record. Sutter looked at him. We'll take it after this session. Cross nodded. He was still gray. He looked like a man who had slept no better than Maya had, which was probably accurate, and who understood that the statement he was about to give would permanently alter certain things about his career and his professional record. He had known that when he walked into Maya's quarters at 0300, he'd come anyway. She had not forgiven him. She didn't think forgiveness was the right category for what she felt about Cross, but she acknowledged privately that he had shown up. The session ran until 11:30. When it ended, the JAG officers stayed to prep Cross's formal statement, and Sutter's team began the administrative work of securing and cataloging the evidence. Maya walked out of the conference room into the ops building corridor and stood there for a moment, letting the building settle around her. Her legs were tired. Her eyes were tired. She had been awake for nearly 30 hours and had spent the majority of them in states of controlled high tension that had cost her something physical she couldn't easily name. Rennick found her in the corridor. He had his work cap in his hands and he was turning it slowly, the way people hold things they don't know what to do with. Ma'am, he said, the discrepancy notice, the one I filed on keys. It was the right call, crew chief. I know. Kept turning the cap. I wanted to say something else. He stopped, looked at the wall to the left of her head, then at her face. I've been crew chief on A-10s for 18 years. I know the accident history of every aircraft I've worked. Yours? He stopped again. Say it, she said. The accident report never sat right with me, he said, the way the port surface locked out. I serviced that aircraft 3 days before the crash, and I didn't find anything, but I was working from the log, and if the log had been altered before I saw it... He stopped. I should have said something at the time. You didn't know what to look for, she said. Neither did I. Still, he looked at his cap. I'm sorry, ma'am. She looked at him for a moment. He was a solid, weathered man who had done his job honestly for 18 years and had spent 2 of them watching a pilot he respected chop vegetables because a report he didn't know was falsified had put her there. There was no version of the last 2 years where Rennick's apology changed anything material. But she accepted it because he meant it. "It's done now," she said. "Go service your aircraft." He put his cap on, straightened it, nodded once, the way NCOs nod when words are insufficient and gesture will have to do. Then he went back to work. Cade arrived at 12:40. He looked like he'd had a difficult night. A split at the corner of his mouth, his jacket wrinkled and missing a button, the specific exhaustion of someone who'd been in a small room answering questions they couldn't afford to answer wrong. He came through the base main gate in a vehicle with Dalton plates and walked across the compound with the slightly rigid carriage of a man whose ribs were unhappy with him. She met him outside the ops building. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about what he looked like or what the night had probably involved. "It went out," she said. "All three," he confirmed, "before they got to me." "Witter's being interviewed." "Good." He rolled his shoulder carefully. "The 3-star. I need to give Sutter the name." "He's ready for it." Cade nodded. He looked at the ops building, then at the flight line visible beyond it, then at her. "Your father's form," he said. "The original filing at Grayfield. There will be an administrative chain of custody question. Where the document went after he submitted it, who received it, who pulled it from the record. That's going to require testimony from Grayfield personnel." "I know. Some of them may not cooperate." "Some of them will," she said, "because they've been sitting with what they knew for 2 years and they're tired of it." She paused. "My father trusted people who turned out to be wrong to trust, but not everyone in that chain was complicit. Some of them were just afraid." Cade looked at her. "You believe that?" "I have to," she said, "because the alternative is that the whole system is rotten, and if that's true, then nothing we've done in the last 2 days changes anything." She paused. "And it does change things, so I believe it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away, out at the flat desert distance beyond the perimeter fence, squinting slightly against the noon light. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. She waited. "The caller who warned you about Keys, the one who said your father trusted you." He turned back to her. "I know who it was. He contacted me this morning through the same channel he used to contact you. His name is Daryl Pitch. He was your father's wingman at his first assignment 30 years ago. He's been retired for 6 years. He paused. "He knew about the form because your father sent him a copy. Physical mail, the day after he filed the original. He kept it. He's been carrying it for 14 months, trying to figure out what to do with it and who was safe to approach." She stood very still. "He's willing to provide the copy and testify to its origin," Cade said. "If you're willing to talk to him first. He said he'd feel better doing it if he could speak to you directly." She looked at the compound around her, at the flight line, at the hard, flat sky above the desert. "Set it up," she said. "I will." Cade hesitated. "He said one more thing. He said your father talked about you constantly. That in 30 years of knowing Warren Voss, the man talked about 3 things: aircraft, maintenance, and his daughter." She looked at the ground for a moment. Then she looked up. "Pitch, I'll call him tonight," she said, "after Sutter has the name. I'll tell him." She turned toward the ops building, stopped. "Cade." She looked back at him. "The 3-star. Tell me now." He told her. She stood in the noon sun and absorbed it. The name was one she'd seen in briefings and command photographs and the kind of official ceremonies that punctuate a military career. A name attached to a face attached to a position of authority that explained, finally, why the suppression had been so complete and so enduring and so difficult to approach from any angle that normal institutional processes could reach. "How long have you known?" she said. 4 months, Cade said. "I needed the document to make it actionable. Without the financial chain from the addendum, the deposition was sealed and uncorroborated. And now?" "Now it's neither," he said. She nodded, turned back toward the building, pushed through the door. The corridor was cool and dim after the outside brightness. She walked it steadily, toward the conference room where Sutter was waiting, carrying the name in her chest like something that had weight and heat and would need to be set down carefully when the time came. She had one more thing to do before she could rest. She went in and closed the door behind her. Sutter wrote the name down on his legal pad without blinking. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at Cade, who had come into the conference room behind Maya and was standing near the door with his damaged ribs and his missing button and the particular stillness of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing and has just set it on a table. "Lieutenant General Marcus Feld," Sutter said. "Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics and Engineering," Cade confirmed. "The Cairn Group Trust is registered in his wife's maiden name. The quarterly disbursements correspond with the anomalous billing cycles going back 5 years. The sealed deposition is from a separate federal civil case involving a defense contractor in an unrelated matter. Feld's name appeared as a beneficial party in a financial instrument that the opposing counsel flagged. The deposition was sealed at the request of the DoD legal office." He paused. "That request was filed by an attorney whose firm also represents Veritas Mechanical Services." The conference room was quiet. Castile, the JAG major, had been making notes since Cade began speaking. She didn't look up. The deposition would need to be unsealed to be usable. The simultaneous transmission to 3 oversight bodies last night included a formal unsealing request, supported by the contract addendum and the Cairn Group financial documentation, Cade said. The request went to the federal district court in the capital. Cade's office has already been in contact with the clerk. Sutter looked up from the legal pad. He was a careful man, and his face showed the specific expression of someone who has just confirmed that the thing they suspected was real is, in fact, real, and who understands that everything which follows from this moment is going to be consequential in ways that don't resolve quickly or cleanly. "Feld has been in his current position for 3 years, Sutter said. "Yes," Cade said. "He has oversight authority over the maintenance procurement division that Witter reports to." "Yes." "Which means Witter wasn't running this, he was administering it." "That's our assessment." Sutter set his pen down. He looked at Maya. "This is going to generate significant institutional pressure," he said. "A lieutenant general. The unsealing of a federal deposition. The scope of the maintenance fraud and the aircraft incidents. The death of a colonel who filed a discrepancy report." He paused. "There will be people inside the system who will want to contain the scope of what becomes public, who will argue that a quieter resolution serves institutional interests." "I know," Maya said. "I want you to understand what that means for you personally. As the central witness in an investigation of this scale, you will be subject to scrutiny and pressure that goes beyond what you've experienced in the last 2 days." "I know that too," she said. "And you're prepared to proceed." She looked at him steadily. "My father filed a form correctly, through the proper channels, and was dead 6 days later. Proceeding quietly is not something I'm capable of." Sutter held her gaze. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something at the bottom of the page. "Then we proceed," he said. The formal investigation's expansion into Feld's office took 4 days to become visible from the outside. On the first day, nothing appeared to change at Redstone Valley. Sutter and his team worked from the operations building in a closed conference room, and the JAG officers made calls, and Cade filed additional materials through secure channels, and the base went about its ordinary routines in the way that bases do, because the people who keep runways operational and aircraft maintained and kitchens running don't stop for investigations being conducted in rooms they don't know about. Maya spent those 4 days in a specific kind of suspension. Her flight status was still technically inactive. The formal review of the crash finding took time, as Castile had said, because formal processes always took time. And she was not assigned to kitchen duty and not assigned to anything else, which meant she existed in the institutional gap between what she had been and what she was becoming, with nothing to fill the hours except the things she chose to fill them with. She chose to be useful. Rennick led her into the maintenance bay on the second morning and didn't ask why she was there or what she intended. She spent 6 hours going through the pre-flight documentation process for the 2 A-10s undergoing inspection, not flying them, not touching the flight controls, just working through the technical checklists with the careful attention of someone reminding their hands and their mind that this was work they knew how to do. It was not glamorous, it was not a statement, it was just what she did when she needed to feel like herself. On the third day, Daryl Pitch called. She took the call in her quarters, sitting at the desk with her notebook open in front of her and a pen she never used. He was 71 years old, his voice rough at the edges in the way of men who had spent decades outdoors in dry climates, and he introduced himself simply as Daryl, and then was quiet for a moment, as if he wasn't sure what the opening sentence of this conversation should be. He sent you a copy, she said, to give him something to start from. The day after he filed the original, Pitch said. Physical mail. He wrote a note on the envelope. Just 3 words. In case something. He didn't finish the sentence. He paused. I thought he was being dramatic. Warren was never dramatic. I didn't understand until... He stopped. I kept the copy because I didn't know what else to do with it, he said. And then when I heard about the road accident, I understood what he'd meant, and I was scared. I'm not ashamed to say that. I was scared because if they would do that to Warren, they would certainly do it to a retired pilot in a small town who nobody knew had a piece of evidence. You were right to be careful, she said. I was a coward, he said, for 14 months. You protected the copy, she said, and you made the call when it mattered. He was quiet again. Then, he talked about you all the time, every phone call. Maya did this, Maya's flying that route, Maya made instructor, Maya got the assignment she wanted. He was... Pitch stopped. He was prouder of you than he knew how to say to your face. You know how men like him are? She did know. She had known it and had sometimes resented it, in the way adult children resent the things their parents could only express sideways. Now she held it differently. He would have figured it out, she said. Even without me. He would have gotten there. I know. No, Pitch said. That's what they knew, too. She gripped the pen. Didn't write anything. I'll give Sutter's people the copy, Pitch said, and I'll testify to whatever they need. I should have done this 14 months ago. You're doing it now, she said. That's what matters. It wasn't entirely true. 14 months mattered. The crash finding had sat on her record for 14 months, and her father had been dead for 14 months, and none of that was erased by a phone call in the right direction at the right time. But it was what the situation allowed, and she said it because she meant the core of it, even if she couldn't mean all of it. They talked for 20 minutes more. He told her things about her father she hadn't known. Small things, old things, stories from 30 years ago when Warren Voss was young and made mistakes and learned from them and became the man he eventually was. She listened to all of it. She didn't write any of it down. When the call ended, she sat at the desk for a long time and looked at the empty notebook page. Then she closed the notebook and went back to work. On the 4th day, Witter was formally charged. The announcement came through Sutter in a brief procedural notification. Brigadier General Paul Witter had been relieved of his duties pending a military justice proceeding on charges, including procurement fraud, falsification of maintenance records, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The notification was 2 paragraphs and contained nothing that hadn't been predictable from the moment the contract addendum landed in 3 oversight offices simultaneously. What the notification didn't contain, what Sutter told her privately, in the corridor outside the conference room, was that Witter had requested a cooperation agreement within 6 hours of his initial interview. I was providing information about the operational structure of the billing arrangement, the chain of communication between his office and Veritas, and the internal process by which maintenance records had been altered or removed. He's giving them Feld, Maya said. He's trying to, Sutter said. Whether what he gives them is sufficient is something the prosecutors will determine. What about Feld himself? Currently on administrative leave pending the deposition unsealing, his legal team filed an emergency motion to maintain the seal. Sutter paused. The court denied it this morning. She nodded. The denial was not expected to happen this fast, Sutter said. 3 separate oversight bodies filing simultaneously with the supporting documentation you and Cade provided created a weight of evidence the court found difficult to set aside. My father built that weight, she said. He just didn't live to file it. Sutter looked at her. Yes, he said. That will be said clearly and on record throughout this process. His contribution to the evidentiary foundation will be formally documented. That's not why I said it. I know, he said, but it matters that it's true. The formal review board convened on the 8th day. It was held in the base operations conference room, the same room where she'd given her initial account to Sutter and Castile, but the composition was different now. 2 senior officers from the Accident Investigation Authority, who had flown in from the regional headquarters, an independent technical consultant with A-10 maintenance expertise, Castile and her JAG team, and Sutter as the presiding officer. Maya sat on one side of the table and answered questions for 3 hours. The questions were thorough and specific and occasionally repetitive, which she understood as the deliberate process of building a record that would survive scrutiny from any direction. She answered each one with the same precision she'd applied to everything else. the actuator values from her father's form, the flight behavior during the incident, the post-crash investigation timeline, the maintenance record gap, the chain of custody for the documents Kate had gathered. The technical consultant, a civilian named Dr. Armand Wessey, who had spent 20 years in aircraft systems analysis, asked her 3 questions that were the most difficult, not because she didn't know the answers, but because they required her to describe, in technical detail, the exact experience of losing control of an aircraft she knew intimately, in the specific way that an induced mechanical failure feels different from pilot error, and why she had known in the moment that something was wrong with the aircraft rather than with herself, even though the official record had decided otherwise. She described it carefully. She described the port surface response going soft in a way that had no business going soft in that phase of the maneuver. She described the microsecond between recognizing the failure and accepting that ejection was the only remaining option. She described the sound the aircraft made when the port control authority was gone. Not a textbook sound, not a sound she'd heard in any training, a specific and wrong sound that she had never been able to get anyone to take seriously because the flight recorder data had been insufficient and the post-crash report had already decided what had happened. Wessey wrote for a long time after she finished. Then he said, "The hydraulic signature your father recorded is consistent with thermal cycling damage in the actuator seal assembly. That type of damage is progressive. It develops over time and is difficult to detect in standard inspection cycles unless you're specifically looking for it. If the component had been flagged for detailed inspection based on your father's report, it would almost certainly have been caught." "Yes," she said. "That's what his form was for." He looked at her. "I'm going to recommend to this board that the pilot error finding in the original report be formally vacated and replaced with a finding of mechanical failure due to a previously undocumented maintenance deficiency." He paused. That recommendation, combined with the evidentiary record of the report's removal from the maintenance log, will support the conclusion that the crash was not only caused by a maintenance failure, but that the failure was preventable and the documentation of it was deliberately suppressed. The room was quiet. "Thank you," Maya said. It came out simpler than she intended. She had expected to feel more, or feel it differently. A release, maybe, or something that resolved cleanly. What she actually felt was quieter and less definable than that. Like the closing of a door that had been standing open for 2 years, not with a slam but with a steady pressure that finally brought it flush with the frame. It was not nothing, but it was not everything either. Cross gave his formal statement on the 9th day. She wasn't in the room for it. She didn't ask for a summary. What she knew, from what Sutter told her afterward, was that Cross had been comprehensive and had not attempted to minimize or reframe his role. He had described the Borland meeting in detail, his decision not to push for a meaningful review of her case, and his 14 months of choosing institutional convenience over the action that the evidence he'd received warranted. His statement would be part of the record. What happened to his career as a result of it would be determined through a separate process that wasn't Maya's concern. He found her in the courtyard outside the operations building on the afternoon of the 9th day, sitting on a low wall with a coffee she'd gotten from the mess hall, and her face turned up toward the sky. The afternoon had a different quality than the mornings. The light was flatter, older, the heat coming off the pale ground rather than from directly above. He stood near her without speaking for a moment. "I'm not looking for absolution," he said. "Good," she said. "I'm going to say it anyway." He looked at the ground, then at the flight line. "You deserve better than what happened here. From the system and from me specifically. I'm saying it not because it fixes anything, but because it's true, and I'm done not saying true things out loud." She looked at him. He was still gray. He might be gray permanently, she thought, or at least for a long time. Some people carry things, and it shows in their color. "It doesn't fix it," she said. "No." "But I heard you," she said. He nodded. He looked like he might say something else, and then he decided not to, which was the right decision. He walked back inside. She finished her coffee and looked at the sky. The review board's formal findings were issued on the 12th day. The pilot error designation was vacated. The crash was redesignated as a mechanical failure, resulting from an undocumented actuator deficiency. The post-crash investigation was cited for insufficient analysis of maintenance documentation and inadequate consideration of pre-existing component anomalies. The original investigating officer, a colonel named Harwick, who had retired 2 years ago, was identified in the findings for the record without any personal culpability determination. The findings noted that Harwick had conducted the investigation in the absence of the critical documentation that had been removed before it reached him. Maya's official flight record was amended. The grounding order, the review board decisions, the suspension findings, all of it was reviewed against the new factual record and found to be without adequate basis. Her flight status was reinstated, effective immediately, pending a standard medical clearance that she was expected to pass without difficulty. Castile delivered the paperwork in the morning. She handed Maya the folder across the desk in the conference room with the particular briskness of a JAG officer who has done what the law required and is satisfied with the outcome without being sentimental about it. "There's one more document in there," Castile said. Maya opened the folder. Behind the status reinstatement order was a single page on official letterhead, a formal commendation signed by the IG office and countersigned by Sutter for the combat action on the day she'd flown the convoy mission. It cited the sortie's outcome, the JTAC's after-action report, and the confirmed results. Enemy positions neutralized, convoy extracted, 6 personnel evacuated without further casualties. It was not a medal. It was a record. It said, officially and permanently, that the cook with the grounded status had gone up in an A-10 on an unauthorized mission and done the job correctly. "Sergeant Dominguez's after-action statement is attached," Castile said. "He filed it voluntarily. It's part of the record." Maya turned the page. Dominguez's statement was handwritten on a standard form, the handwriting of a man who wrote carefully because he understood that what he was writing mattered. He had described the engagement from the ground, the weight of the gunfire, the uncertainty about whether any air support would reach them in time, and then the aircraft arriving and the specific way the cannon fire had walked across the HMG position and the silence that followed. At the end, he had added 2 sentences in the remarks block that weren't part of the standard after-action format. "The pilot who came for us didn't have to. She was told she couldn't fly." I don't know what that means inside a military system. I know what it means to the 6 of us who are home. She held the page for a moment. Then she put it back in the folder and closed it. "Thank you, Major," she said. Castile nodded and left. She went to the flight line that afternoon. Not to fly. Her medical clearance was scheduled for the following week, and until it was processed, her reinstatement was technically in a holding state. But nobody stopped her when she walked through the gate onto the tarmac, because her credentials were current now, and her face was known in a different way than it had been 2 weeks ago. Rennick was at Pad 6, running a post-maintenance check on the same A-10 she'd flown. He looked up when she approached and didn't say anything. She walked around the aircraft the way she always had, trailing her hand along the fuselage, reading the surface, checking things without being asked. The gun bay was closed. The TGP pod was clean. Someone had touched up a small paint chip near the nose landing gear door with a slightly wrong shade of gray, which would bother her mildly for the rest of the aircraft's service life. "Hydraulic system 2, she said. "The pressure variance you noted before the flight." "Corrected," Rennick said. "Component replaced. Logged and verified." "Good." She stood under the port wing and looked up at the control surface. The actuator housing was visible from this angle if you knew what you were looking at. A compact assembly tucked against the inboard surface of the aileron. Perfectly ordinary. Perfectly unremarkable. The kind of component that lived in thousands of aircraft and was inspected and logged and occasionally failed for reasons that were nobody's fault, except when it was somebody's fault. She looked at it for a moment, then she dropped her gaze and stepped back from the wing. "Crew chief," she said. "Ma'am?" "When my clearance comes through, this aircraft, I'll have her ready," he said. Feld was formally charged on the 17th day. The charges came through a military justice instrument supported by the unsealed deposition, Witter's cooperation statement, the Cairn Group financial documentation, and the contract addendum with the secondary billing structure. The charges included bribery, procurement fraud, conspiracy to falsify government records, and, in a separate count that the DCIS had added based on its own investigation, running parallel to the IG process, conspiracy in connection with the death of Colonel Warren Voss. The last count was the hardest to build and the most uncertain in terms of outcome. The road outside Grayfield had been wet, and the car had gone off a bridge, and 14 months had passed. Evidence that proved human agency in a weather-related single-vehicle accident was difficult to develop regardless of how compelling the circumstantial case was. But it was charged. It was on record. It would be argued in front of people who had authority to decide it, with the full evidentiary weight of everything that surrounded it. Maya heard about it from Cade, who was still at Redstone Valley in an informal capacity. Technically, he had no ongoing assignment here, but nobody had asked him to leave, and he had continued to be useful in ways that organizations find difficult to say no to. He called her at 0700 and told her in 2 sentences. "They charged him," she said. "Yes." "The conspiracy count on my father." "Yes." She was in the mess hall when the call came, sitting at the staff table again with morning coffee. The breakfast rush was underway. Decker running the line, the usual noise and movement of 200 people starting their day. She sat in it and held the phone and let the information be what it was. "It won't be easy to prove," she said. "No," Cade said. "But it won't be dismissed either. There's enough to take it forward." "That's enough," she said. "For now." She meant it. She had spent 2 years and the 14 months before that making peace with incomplete resolutions, and she understood the difference between what you could achieve and what you deserved to achieve, and she understood that the gap between those two things was where most of life happened. The charge existed. The count was on record. Her father's name was attached to a criminal charge in a federal military proceeding, not as a casualty to be explained away, but as a person whose death someone would have to account for. It was not justice completed. It was justice in motion. She could live with that. Her medical clearance came through on the 21st day. Standard battery, flight physical, cognitive assessment, vision, vestibular function. She passed everything. The flight surgeon, a captain named Olomoye, who was thorough and unhurried and asked 3 times whether she was experiencing any unusual stress responses, finally signed off at 1400 and shook her hand with a sincerity that felt genuine. "You're clear," he said. "Thank you," she said. She was in the flight suit 20 minutes later. Rennick had the aircraft ready exactly as he'd said he would. Fuel at full, ordnance off because this was a clearance check flight and not a combat tasking, systems nominal. The paint chip near the nose gear door still the wrong shade of gray. She went through the pre-flight with him step by step, same as always, unhurried, each item checked against the log. "Hydraulic system 2, she said. "Nominal," he said. "New component, verified. TGP. Synced and clean. Gun. Safe. Rounds at full, trigger locked." She looked at him. He looked at her. "She's ready, he said. She climbed the boarding ladder. The cockpit settled around her the way it had 2 weeks ago and the way it had for 11 years before that. The smell, the weight of the harness, the feel of the seat, the particular geometry of the instrument panel that her eyes moved across without thinking. She ran the startup sequence from memory, and the turbines wound up, and the warning lights cleared, and the HUD came alive in the green precision of a system that was working correctly and knew it. "Tower, Warthog 24, requesting clearance for departure, runway 20, standard pattern altitude, training profile. 24 Tower, cleared for departure, runway 20. Wind is calm. Have a good flight, Captain." She paused for a fraction of a second. "Have a good flight, Captain." 2 weeks ago, the tower controller had hesitated before clearing her, had checked his screen twice, had sounded like a man unsure whether to open a door he'd been told was locked. Today, the voice was uncomplicated. She was a pilot. The aircraft was on the runway. The clearance was a formality. She released the brakes. The A-10 gathered speed down the runway in its ungainly, powerful way. Not graceful, never graceful, just massive and committed and increasingly inevitable. She felt the nose lift, felt the gear break ground, pulled the handle and listened to the wheels retract. The desert dropped away. She climbed through 3,000 feet and kept climbing, not to any particular mission altitude, just up, because she could, because the sky above Redstone Valley was clear and deep blue and had no ceiling that she could see from here. At 8,000, she leveled off and turned east, and the full sweep of the plateau opened below her, pale rock and brown brush, and the distant edge of the range where the canyon country began. She flew the standard training pattern, turns, altitude changes, gentle maneuvers to re-establish the tactile familiarity that she'd found largely intact during the convoy mission, but which she wanted to confirm at leisure, without combat geometry and JTAC radio traffic, and the pressing weight of 6 lives below her. She flew for an hour, and the aircraft responded correctly to every input, and nothing failed and nothing was wrong. She knew she would keep checking for the failure that had taken everything from her. For months, maybe longer, every anomalous vibration and every unexpected control surface response would hit her nervous system with a particular sharpness. That was not something that resolved because the facts were corrected. It lived in the body, not in the record, and the body took its own time. She accepted that. On the way back, she flew over the Black Ridge corridor. It was not on the standard training pattern. She deviated to reach it, 2 minutes out of her way, descending slightly so the terrain was closer and the dry creek bed was visible, and the rock formations at the base of the second ridgeline were clear in the targeting pod even without a weapons load. She didn't arm anything. She didn't run a targeting sequence. She just looked at it from above. The place where the convoy had been pinned, the position she'd hit, the road that was empty now and peaceful in the way that places become peaceful after violence has passed through them and moved on. She thought about Dominguez and the 5 others. She thought about Sergeant Dominguez's daughter, who had a father coming home. She thought about what Rennick had looked like at the bottom of the boarding ladder after the mission, turning his cap in his hands. She pulled up and turned north for home. The mess hall was serving dinner when she came in from the flight line. She was still in her flight suit. She hadn't changed because she wasn't ready to change. She wanted to sit at a table in the clothes of what she actually was for a little while, in the space where she'd spent 2 years being something else. Decker was behind the serving line, finishing the dinner run, and he looked up when she came through the door. He looked at the flight suit. He looked at her face. He didn't say anything. He reached under the counter and put a plate together, a real one, not the staff tray, and set it at the end of the counter. "Sit down," he said. "I'll bring coffee." She sat. The dining hall was half full, the dinner crowd thinning toward the end of service. Some of the faces she recognized: maintenance personnel, admin staff, a few of the junior pilots from the ready room. Some of them noticed her. None of them said anything, but the noticing had a different quality than the noticing had 2 weeks ago, and she felt it without looking for it. Decker brought the coffee. "You're not a bad cook," she said. He blinked. "What?" "The eggs this morning," she said. "Better than they were 6 months ago." He stood there for a moment, genuinely uncertain how to respond to a compliment he hadn't expected from a direction he hadn't anticipated. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He just said, "Thanks," and went back to the line. She ate her dinner. It was fine. Cade came to find her as she was leaving. He was at the door with his jacket on and a bag over his shoulder, which told her he was leaving tonight rather than tomorrow, as she'd thought. He looked better than he had on the day he arrived from Dalton. The split at his mouth was nearly healed, and he moved without the careful rigidity that had meant his ribs were unhappy. "Heading back to the capital," he said. "Feld's arraignment. And about 6 months of follow-on work." He paused. "Witter's cooperation is producing faster than expected. The structure was more extensive than we knew. There are 2 other officers besides Witter in the procurement division who are going to be named." "The other aircraft incidents," she said. "We're building cases on all 11. The 2 fatal ones are going to take the longest." He looked at her. "Your father's will take the longest of all." "I know. I want you to know that it won't be dropped. Whatever the ultimate outcome, it won't be something that gets quietly set aside." She held his gaze. "I believe you," she said. It was true. She believed him not because she had any particular reason to trust institutions after everything that had happened, but because she had watched him work for the better part of a week, and she understood what kind of person he was. The kind who had spent 7 months looking for a pilot in a kitchen because a maintenance form deserved to be in the right hands. He extended his hand. She shook it. "Your father was right about you," he said. "I know," she said. "He usually was." He went out the door. She stood in the mess hall entrance and watched through the window as he crossed the compound, got into a vehicle, and drove toward the base main gate. The evening light was the long, angled kind that made everything look slightly more definitive than it was, and she watched it until the vehicle turned out of sight. She called Pitch that night from her quarters. Not about the testimony or the investigation or any of the procedural things that still needed doing. She called him because he had stories she hadn't heard yet, and she had a phone, and neither of them had anywhere they needed to be at 2000 on a desert base in early autumn. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me something I don't know about him," she said. A brief silence. Then a sound she hadn't expected. Something close to a laugh, rough and warm. "How much time do you have?" "All of it," she said. He talked for a long time. She listened. She didn't write any of it down. 3 weeks later, in the review board's formal closing statement, the presiding officer read into the record the vacated findings, the reinstated status, and the official conclusion regarding the cause of the crash. It was a procedural document in official language that said nothing more or less than what it needed to say. At the end, unprompted, the presiding officer added one sentence that was not part of the standard format. The Air Force notes that the events documented in this proceeding were identified and brought forward through the persistent efforts of Captain Maya Voss and the posthumous contribution of Colonel Warren Voss, whose original discrepancy report was the foundation upon which the complete evidentiary record was built. Maya sat in the review room and heard that sentence and looked at the wall directly ahead of her and kept her face composed. She mostly succeeded. 6 weeks after the convoy mission, she flew again out of Redstone Valley on a scheduled training tasking. Standard live-fire profile, 2 aircraft, herself and a captain named Lyra, who had arrived 3 weeks earlier as part of the replacement pilot rotation and who flew with the focused aggression of someone who hadn't been flying long enough to be frightened by it yet. They flew a coordinated gunnery run on the southern range, taking turns on the targets, talking through the radio with the matter-of-fact shorthand of people doing a job they know. Lyra was good, not exceptional, but good in the consistent, reliable way that would make her exceptional eventually if she stayed with it. On the way back, Lyra came up on the inner flight frequency. 2-4, what's your call for the break? Standard entry, Maya said. Follow my lead. Copy. She brought the aircraft around in a wide arc over the plateau, the base coming up on the nose, and broke into the landing pattern with the A-10's particular ground-shaking authority. The gear came down. The runway filled the windscreen. She felt the main gear contact, then the nose, and the aircraft settled into its rollout, and the speed bled down, and the world was flat and concrete and ordinary again. She taxied to pad 6. Rennick was there. She ran through the shutdown sequence, killed the turbines, and sat in the fading vibration while the engines cooled, listening to the bass sounds returning around her. Voices, equipment, a vehicle somewhere, the ordinary texture of a place doing its work. Then she climbed down the ladder. The sun was at a low angle, the desert's autumn light making long shadows across the tarmac. She stood beside the aircraft for a moment, not performing anything, not marking anything, just standing there in the warmth of an afternoon at an airbase in the middle of a high desert, in the clothes of what she was. Rennick walked over from the equipment bay. How'd she run? He said. Clean, she said. The gun pulled slightly right on the second run. Same 3 milliradians. I'll schedule the recalibration for this week. Do it tomorrow, she said. I'm flying her again on Thursday. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing underneath a smile, the quiet substrate of it. Yes, ma'am, he said. She pulled off her hat and walked toward the ops building. The flight line was behind her, and the sun was at her back, and the shadow she threw stretched long across the pale tarmac. She didn't look back at it. She didn't need to see it to know it was there. There are people in this world who get pushed out of the places they were built for, by systems that make mistakes, by individuals who protect their own interests over the truth, by the particular cruelty of having your best work destroyed and then being handed a mop and told to get on with it. Most of them never get the record corrected. Most of them carry the wrong version of their own story for the rest of their lives. For those people, the wrong version is not the true one. The kitchen is not the last word. And the ones who buried you have not in the end determined what you are worth. That is decided by what you do when the aircraft is on the runway, and the runway is the only way forward.